Picture a grand hall in the heart of 15th century Burgundy, where the air is thick with the scent of roasting boar and beeswax candles. The flickering torchlight catches the glint of gold-embroidered silks and priceless jewels adorning Europe's most powerful nobles. Laughter and the strains of a lute fill the space, a symphony of opulence and power. But beneath the surface of this magnificent feast, hidden agendas simmer and political alliances are forged with whispers. This is the world of the Knights of the Golden Fleece, an order founded not merely to celebrate chivalry, but to bind the continent's elite in a web of loyalty and ambition. Then imagine the scene just a few years later when the Order's formidable founder, Duke Philip the Good, lies cold in his tomb. His death creates a void, a sudden and unsettling silence that ripples across kingdoms. In that moment, the true nature of the Order he created begins to reveal itself not as a simple fellowship of warriors, but as one of history's most enduring and secretive puzzles. A mystery woven into the very fabric of European power for centuries. This is not just the story of a knightly order with a mythical name. The Knights of the Golden Fleece were architects of destiny, their influence shaping wars, crowns, and the clandestine flow of information across a continent. Their symbol, the Golden Fleece itself, evokes the ancient quest of Jason and the Argonauts, a tale of an impossible journey for a prize of immense power. And like that legendary fleece, the Order's true purpose was often hidden, guarded by layers of ritual, coded language, and absolute secrecy. Why did membership require proof of noble lineage stretching back generations? What secrets were passed down in their clandestine chapters, held in trust by emperors and kings? The mysteries are as intricate as the jeweled collars they wore, and the answers are scattered, hidden in coded manuscripts, disputed artifacts, and the silent stone of ancient castles. So we invite you to join us on a journey to pull back the velvet curtain on this legendary brotherhood. We will walk the shadowy corridors of power where they met, decipher the symbols they left behind, and question whether their legacy was one of pure chivalric honor or something far more complex and consequential. This is a deep dive into a world where myth and history are inextricably linked, where a single order's actions could alter the fate of nations. Prepare to explore the whispered rumors, the untold stories, and the breathtaking scope of an organization that mastered the art of secrecy, leaving behind a legacy that continues to captivate and mystify us to this day. In the year 1430, the city of Bruges was not just a city, it was the glittering financial and cultural capital of Northern Europe, a place where merchants grew richer than kings and where art and ambition walked hand in hand. It was here, amidst this intoxicating atmosphere of immense wealth and burgeoning power, that a young duke named Philip III of Burgundy, known to history as Philip the Good, made a decision that would echo for centuries. His realm, the Duchy of Burgundy, was a powerhouse, but it was a fractured one, a collection of territories stitched together by marriage and conquest, lacking the deep, unifying tradition of a kingdom like France or England. Philip understood that raw economic and military strength was not enough to secure his dynasty's place among Europe's elite. He needed something more potent, a symbol, a legend, a binding force. And so, on the 10th of January, to celebrate his own marriage to the Portuguese Infanta Isabella, he created that force, the Order of the Golden Fleece. This was far more than a simple chivalric fraternity. It was a masterstroke of political engineering. By gathering 24 of the most influential nobles from across his lands into an exclusive brotherhood, Philip was welding their personal fortunes and loyalties directly to his throne. Membership was not just an honor, it was an unbreakable contract. The knights swore oaths of fealty not just to the abstract ideals of chivalry, but specifically to the person of the Duke, their sovereign. In one brilliant move, Philip created a loyal council, a dedicated military command structure, and a powerful propaganda tool, all wrapped in the gilded cloak of knightly virtue. He was effectively building a state within a state, a compact and fiercely loyal power block that could rival the ancient monarchies surrounding him. Think of it as the ultimate networking event, but with eternal oaths and the fate of nations hanging in the balance. Now, why the Golden Fleece? The choice of this mythical symbol was deliberate and profoundly insightful. Every knight in Europe had their patron saint, but Philip reached back further into the realm of classical myth to the story of Jason and the Argonauts. Their quest for the Golden Fleece was the ancient world's ultimate adventure story, a tale of a near-impossible journey undertaken by a band of heroes. For Philip, this was the perfect allegory. The fleece itself represented the pinnacle of achievement, a prize of such immense value and rarity that it was worth any peril. He was framing his new order not as a comfortable club for the nobility, but as a perpetual quest for moral and chivalric excellence. The knight's journey was to be an internal one, a constant striving for virtue, piety, and courage. Furthermore, the story of Jason was deeply intertwined with the idea of a sea voyage, a powerful connection to the mercantile wealth of Burgundy, whose ships and trade routes were the source of its fabulous riches. The fleece was a symbol that spoke simultaneously to martial glory, spiritual pursuit, and commercial success, making it the ideal emblem for a duke whose power was built on all three. This single, resonant image elevated his new order from a political maneuver to a legendary undertaking, granting it an aura of timeless prestige that a more conventional heraldic symbol could never have achieved. To the outside world, the Order of the Golden Fleece presented a spectacle of unrivaled grandeur, a living tapestry of chivalric perfection meticulously woven by Philip the Good. The heart of this public image was a set of strict, elaborate statutes that governed every aspect of a knight's life, from his moral character to the very fabric he wore. These rules were not gentle suggestions. They were a binding code demanding absolute fidelity to the church, unwavering loyalty to the duke, and impeccable conduct in both war and peace. A knight could be expelled for heresy, treason, or even the grave sin of fleeing from battle, ensuring that the order's reputation remained untarnished. This rigorous framework was designed to present the Brotherhood as the ultimate embodiment of Christian virtue and aristocratic honor, a beacon for all of Europe to look up to. The most dazzling manifestation of this ideal was the Order's Grand Chapter meetings. Held in Europe's most magnificent cathedrals and palaces, these gatherings were less like private meetings and more like a form of political theater on an epic scale. Picture a solemn procession of the most powerful men on the continent, each adorned in robes of deep scarlet and majestic velvet, walking in lockstep to the sound of sacred hymns. The air would be thick with incense and the palpable weight of their collective authority. During these chapters, the knights would attend Mass, review their statutes, and sit in judgment on any member accused of violating their sacred oaths. Every gesture, every ritual was choreographed to reinforce their unity, piety, and immense social power, sending a clear message to rival kingdoms and their own subjects about the unshakable strength of the Burgundian state. And then there was the symbol itself, the breathtaking collar that every knight was required to wear at these official functions. This was not merely jewelry, it was a walking proclamation of the Order's identity and mythos. Crafted from the purest gold, the collar was a chain of linked fire steels, shaped like the letter B for Burgundy, with striking flints emitting fiery sparks. Hanging from this glittering chain was the prized emblem, the Golden Fleece itself, a small, exquisitely detailed sculpture of a ram's pelt. The symbolism here was deep and multifaceted. The flints and steel represented the divine spark of faith and the knight's readiness to defend it, a flash of fire in the darkness. The fleece, of course, tied them directly to the heroic quest of Jason, positioning them as modern Argonauts on a perpetual search for glory and grace. Wearing this collar was a constant physical reminder of their exalted status and the immense burdens that came with it. This entire glittering enterprise, the statutes, the ceremonies, the magnificent regalia, was engineered to position the order as the pinnacle of Burgundian courtly life. It was the ultimate aspiration for every nobleman in Philip's domains, the visible proof that one had arrived at the very peak of the social and political hierarchy. The order's events were the social events of the season, where alliances between great families were solidified, and where the cultural supremacy of the Burgundian court was put on dazzling display through feasts, jousts, and artistic patronage. Yet for all its public splendor, this was always a carefully controlled performance. The true discussions, the political maneuvering, and the secret oaths were almost certainly reserved for closed-door sessions away from the public eye. The magnificent facade was a shield, a masterpiece of propaganda that concealed the intricate and often ruthless machinery of power it was built to protect, captivating the imagination of Europe while the real work of empire proceeded in the shadows. But while the story of Jason provided a glorious public legend, the true meaning of the Golden Fleece has remained one of history's most tantalizing puzzles. The choice was so specific, so rich with potential meaning, that historians and scholars have debated its true significance for centuries, suggesting that Philip the Good was embedding multiple layers of purpose into this single potent symbol. The first and most compelling alternative theory points not to Greek myth but to the Old Testament. In the Book of Judges, the warrior Gideon lays a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, asking God for a sign. Overnight, dew saturates the fleece while the ground around it remains dry. For a Christian knightly order, this biblical parallel is incredibly powerful. It transforms the fleece from an object of pagan quest into a symbol of divine favor, a sign from God himself. In this interpretation, the knight is not Jason seeking personal glory, but Gideon, seeking divine guidance and confirmation before undertaking a holy mission. This reading aligns perfectly with the order's stated dedication to the defense of the Christian faith, suggesting a spiritual depth that complemented the martial prestige of the Argonaut myth. Another fascinating perspective comes from the world of alchemy, the mysterious precursor to modern chemistry. In alchemical tradition, the ultimate goal was the creation of the philosopher's stone, a substance capable of performing the great work, the transmutation of base metals like lead into pure, perfect gold. The pursuit of the Golden Fleece was a well-known allegory for this entire alchemical process. The knight's arduous journey, then, becomes a metaphor for the alchemist's spiritual and physical labor in purifying not metal, but his own soul. The base metal is the flawed, mortal man. The gold is the perfected, virtuous knight. This idea would have resonated deeply in a court like Philip's, which was a center of learning and esoteric knowledge. It proposes that the Order of the Golden Fleece was not just a club for the already noble, but a transformative institution designed to spiritually refine its members, turning them from merely powerful men into paragons of chivalric perfection. We must also consider a far more earthly, yet equally convincing explanation: economics. Burgundy's incredible wealth, the very wealth that funded Philip's lavish court and ambitious politics, was built overwhelmingly on the wool and cloth trade. Cities like Bruges and Ghent were industrial powerhouses, processing English wool into luxurious textiles that were sold across the continent. The fleece, in this context, is not a mythical prize or divine sign, but the literal source of Burgundian power. By adopting this symbol, Philip could have been making a bold, pragmatic statement, celebrating the commercial engine that fueled his entire dynasty. It was a clever way to honor the merchant classes who funded his wars and palaces, integrating the reality of economic might with the aristocratic ideal of chivalry. This transforms the symbol from something purely legendary into a badge of mercantile pride, a reminder that behind every glittering knight stood a flourishing trade network. So, which theory is correct? The answer is likely that they all are. Philip the Good was a master strategist, and the power of the Golden Fleece as a symbol lies in its beautiful ambiguity. To the pious, it was Gideon's fleece. To the classically educated, it was Jason's quest. To the learned initiate dabbling in esoteric arts, it was an alchemical secret. And to the practical merchant on the streets of Bruges, it was the very product that made their world possible. This multi-layered meaning was not an accident, it was the point. It allowed the order to speak a different language to every segment of society, creating a big tent of ideological support. This profound ambiguity is our first real clue that the Order of the Golden Fleece was designed to be more than it appeared. The symbol itself was a perfect container for secrets, inviting us to look past the glittering gold and ask what other truths lay hidden within the Order's rituals and ranks. To truly grasp the immense significance of the Golden Fleece, we must step back and view the 15th century European continent not as a collection of separate nations, but as a single, vast chessboard. The pieces were thrones, armies, and trading monopolies, and the players were dynasties locked in a perpetual struggle for supremacy. At the heart of this board sat the Duchy of Burgundy, a territorial anomaly often described as a middle kingdom, wedged precariously between two giants, the Kingdom of France to the west and the sprawling, decentralized Holy Roman Empire to the east. France, the traditional feudal overlord of the Burgundian dukes, watched with growing alarm as its vassal amassed wealth and land that rivaled its own. The empire, a patchwork of princes and bishoprics, represented both a potential ally and a source of constant, low-grade conflict over border territories. Into this volatile geopolitical landscape, Philip the Good introduced his order not as a mere decoration, but as his masterstroke, a sophisticated political instrument designed to secure his fragile legacy. The order's primary function in this grand game was one of consolidation and control. By binding the leading nobles from his far-flung territories, from wealthy Flanders to the forests of Luxembourg, into a single, oath-bound fraternity, Philip was forging a unified ruling class. He was quite literally creating a Burgundian identity from the top down. Before the order, a Flemish count might feel more connection to his local interests or even to the French king than to a duke in Dijon. After his induction into the Golden Fleece, his primary loyalty was ceremonially and spiritually redirected to Philip. This internal diplomacy was crucial. It prevented the disintegration of his composite state and ensured that when Philip went to war, his entire territory marched with him, not as reluctant subjects but as sworn brothers in arms. The chapter meetings acted as a periodic reinforcement of this bond, a place where disputes between powerful vassals could be adjudicated by the Duke himself, strengthening his role as the ultimate arbiter and peacekeeper within his own domain. But the Order's power extended far beyond Burgundy's borders, serving as an incredibly flexible and prestigious tool of foreign policy. Membership in the Golden Fleece became one of the highest honors a European prince could receive, a signal of favor that was carefully calculated. Philip and his successors used this honor to weave a complex web of alliances. By bestowing the fleece on a foreign prince like a powerful Duke of Savoy or an ambitious King of England, they were effectively drawing that ruler into their sphere of influence. It was a non-aggression pact wrapped in a chivalric ceremony, a way to neutralize a potential enemy by making him a brother. Conversely, withholding the fleece was a powerful, silent rebuke. A neighboring count or duke who was passed over for membership understood the message perfectly. He was outside the inner circle, his loyalty was suspect, and his interests might be overlooked. This elevated the order into a barometer of international standing. Its membership lists a public ledger of who was in favor with the powerhouse of Burgundy. The ultimate test of this political machinery came with the order of succession. When Duke Philip the Good died, the entire delicate structure faced its greatest threat. His son and successor, Charles the Bold, was a man of immense ambition and explosive temper, determined to transform his inherited collection of territories into a cohesive crown kingdom. Charles immediately recognized the Order of the Golden Fleece as the key instrument of his ambitions. He leaned on its authority to legitimize his relentless wars of expansion, presenting his campaigns not as personal aggression, but as the collective will of Europe's most esteemed chivalric brotherhood. He used its chapters to demand unprecedented financial and military support from his knights, pushing the bonds of feudal obligation to their breaking point. Under Charles, the Order became the command center for his empire-building project, its sacred oaths twisted into a justification for near-constant warfare. The knights who had sworn to follow their sovereign found themselves on a collision course with the rest of Europe, their collars becoming symbols not just of honor, but of a terrifying, unchecked ambition that would ultimately lead to catastrophe on the frozen fields of Nancy. This constant interplay between the Order and its two great rivals, France and the Empire, reveals its true nature as a diplomatic weapon. The King of France, watching Burgundy's power grow, could do little but seethe as his own most powerful vassals were inducted into this rival order, their loyalties divided. The Holy Roman Emperor, while sometimes an ally, was always a competitor. The strategic bestowal of the Fleece upon key German princes along the Rhine was a classic Burgundian tactic to pull them away from imperial influence and into the Burgundian orbit. In this light, every new knight invested with the golden collar was a move on the continental chessboard, a pawn promoted to a knight, strengthening Burgundy's position against its more established neighbors. The Order was never an isolated island of chivalry. It was born from the cutthroat realities of 15th century power politics, and for decades, it was the most effective tool a Duke of Burgundy had to command loyalty, project strength, and challenge the ancient hierarchies of Europe. Yet for all its public glory and political cunning, another, far more shadowy origin story for the Golden Fleece has persisted through the centuries, a theory that Philip the Good's order was not a new creation, but a carefully disguised resurrection. To understand this compelling idea, we must rewind over a century before Bruges to a Friday the 13th in October 1307, when King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to a powerful military order, moved to destroy his creditors. On that infamous day, agents of the French king launched a coordinated dawn raid, arresting hundreds of the Knights Templar across France on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and secret profane rituals. The subsequent trials, fueled by confessions extracted under brutal torture, led to the Templars' suppression and the burning at the stake of their last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. The order was effectively erased, its vast network of preceptories dissolved, and its legendary wealth and influence seemingly vanished into the mist of history. But what if it didn't? What if the Templar legacy simply went underground, waiting for a new patron and a new name? The parallels between the two orders are simply too striking to ignore. Both the Templars and the Fleece were, at their core, exclusive international brotherhoods of the elite, bound by sacred oaths of loyalty and secrecy. Both maintained a strict hierarchy with a sovereign at their head, for the Templars, the Pope; for the Fleece, the Duke of Burgundy. Both held secretive chapter meetings where members would gather behind closed doors, their discussions shielded from the outside world. And both were, by the standards of their time, astonishingly wealthy and politically connected institutions that seemed to operate with a degree of independence that made monarchs nervous. The Golden Fleece, emerging just over a century after the Templars' destruction, fits the profile of a successor organization perfectly, a new vessel designed to carry an old flame, but this time under the protection of a temporal ruler, making it far less vulnerable to the whims of a pope or a covetous king. Perhaps the most tantalizing connection lies in the realm of finance and hidden treasure. The Templars were the bankers of the Crusader states, developing a sophisticated system of credit and wealth management that made them the de facto treasury for European nobility. When they were dissolved, a significant portion of their immense movable wealth, chests of gold, silver, and precious relics, was never officially accounted for. Legends immediately sprouted of Templar treasure fleas slipping away under cover of darkness. Now consider the timing of the Golden Fleece's founding. The Duchy of Burgundy under Philip the Good experienced an almost miraculous explosion of cultural and economic power. Where did the funds for such staggering patronage of the arts, such lavish building projects, and such a powerful military machine truly come from? The theory suggests that Philip's newfound riches were not solely the product of the wool trade, but that he had gained access to a hidden source of capital, the lost treasury of the Templars. In this scenario, the Golden Fleece was not just a spiritual heir, but the direct beneficiary, created to manage and protect this ill-gotten fortune under a new, legally sound chivalric guise. But the inheritance may have been more than just gold. The Templars were accused of harboring esoteric, even heretical knowledge, perhaps gleaned from their long stay in the Holy Land. Stories persisted of secret rituals, the veneration of mysterious heads or idols, and an understanding of ancient wisdom that challenged Orthodox Church doctrine. The Golden Fleece, with its deeply symbolic and ambiguous emblem, its secret chapters, and its aura of mystery, provides a perfect container for such forbidden knowledge. Could the real fleece have been a metaphor for this hidden gnosis, a body of wisdom so valuable it was worth a heroic quest to protect? The Order's alleged connections to alchemy, which we touched on earlier, gain a new, darker dimension in this light. The alchemical pursuit of transforming base metal into gold becomes a coded reference to the spiritual transformation of a man through access to secret traditions, traditions the Templars were said to have died to protect. The fleece then becomes the guardian of a double secret, the physical treasure that funded its power and the spiritual secrets that justified its existence. Of course, we must tread carefully here, as hard historical evidence for a direct lineage is notoriously elusive. Mainstream historians often dismiss the connection as romantic conspiracy theory, pointing out that Philip never explicitly mentioned the Templars in the Fleece's founding statutes. Yet the circumstantial case remains powerfully evocative. The memory of the Templars' power and their shocking demise was still fresh in the 15th century aristocratic mind. For a shrewd ruler like Philip the Good, creating an order that echoed the Templars' structure but was firmly under his own control would have been a masterful act of political and spiritual reclamation. He would be harnessing the potent, unresolved myth of the Templars, their mystery, their martyrdom, their untapped potential, and channeling it into a new institution that served his own dynasty. Whether as a calculated homage or a direct continuation, the shadow of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon looms large over the Knights of the Golden Fleece, suggesting that the true quest may not have been for a mythical ram's pelt, but for the lost legacy of the most famous and tragic brotherhood in history. The ambitions of the Burgundian dukes reached their zenith and their end with Charles the Bold. His relentless campaigns to forge a true kingdom strained his resources and his alliances to the breaking point. Then, in 1477, on a frozen battlefield outside the walls of Nancy, Charles met his death, his body left mutilated in the snow. In that single, catastrophic moment, the brilliant, fragile construct of the Burgundian state began to crumble. Charles left no male heir, only a 20-year-old daughter, Mary, and in the ruthless world of 15th century dynastic politics, a young, unmarried duchess was not seen as a ruler in her own right, but as the ultimate prize, the key to unlocking a vast and wealthy inheritance. The fate of the Duchy of Burgundy, and with it the Order of the Golden Fleece, now hinged entirely on whom Mary of Burgundy would marry. The King of France, Louis XI, saw his chance. He immediately moved to reclaim the Duchy of Burgundy itself, which was technically a French fief, sending his armies to occupy its lands. For Mary, the situation was desperate. To save her inheritance from being completely swallowed by her powerful neighbor, she made a momentous decision. She turned away from the French and toward the rising power to the east, the House of Habsburg. She married Maximilian of Habsburg, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor. This union was far more than a romantic match. It was a strategic masterstroke that would alter the map of Europe for centuries. Through this marriage, the entire Burgundian inheritance, the rich Low Countries, the Franche-Comté, and all the associated titles, passed into the hands of the Habsburg dynasty. And crucially, so did the sovereignty of the Order of the Golden Fleece. In an instant, the order founded to assert Burgundian independence from France became a Habsburg institution, the most glittering jewel in their expanding imperial crown. Under the Habsburgs, the order underwent a profound transformation. It was no longer the centerpiece of a single, compact duchy, but one of the many tools used to govern a sprawling, worldwide empire. The Habsburgs, through a series of strategic marriages and inheritances, came to rule a collection of territories so vast it was famously said that the sun never sets on their domains. This presented an immense challenge: how to foster loyalty and a sense of common identity between a Spanish grandee, a Flemish merchant prince, a German knight, and a noble from the Kingdom of Naples. The Order of the Golden Fleece became a critical part of the answer. Emperors like Charles V, who was Mary and Maximilian's grandson, used the fleece with brilliant political instinct. He bestowed the coveted collar strategically across his empire, creating a pan-European network of the most powerful men, all personally bound by oath to him as the sovereign of the order. This created a fascinating duality. On one hand, the order's rituals and statutes were preserved with almost religious reverence, maintaining its aura of ancient prestige. The Grand Chapter meetings continued, now held in cities like Madrid, Vienna, or Brussels, serving as magnificent imperial reunions. On the other hand, its function became even more deeply political and, out of necessity, more secretive. In an empire constantly threatened by rebellion, religious schism, and foreign wars, the loyalty of the Knights of the Golden Fleece was not just an honor, it was a vital matter of state security. The Knights formed an informal privy council, a trusted inner circle upon which the emperor could rely for the most sensitive military commands and diplomatic missions. The Order's secret chapters became a place where the most delicate matters of empire could be discussed away from the prying eyes of regular courtiers and foreign ambassadors, binding the Habsburgs' disparate elites together with chains of gold and solemn vows. This elevated importance also deepened the mysteries surrounding the Brotherhood. As the Habsburg Empire became the primary defender of Catholicism during the Protestant Reformation, the Order's strict requirement of Catholic orthodoxy took on a new militant edge. Yet within its ranks there were whispers and rumors. Could a knight who secretly sympathized with new religious ideas maintain his position? What truly transpired in those closed-door sessions where the fate of continents was decided? The public saw only the magnificent processions and the glittering collars, but the real power and the real secrets of the Golden Fleece were now guarded by the most powerful dynasty in Europe, making its inner workings more impenetrable and its true influence more profound than even in its glorious Burgundian beginnings. The Fleece was no longer just a symbol of chivalric quest. It had become a key component of imperial governance, a binding force for a realm so vast and diverse that only a legend could hope to hold it together. But the glittering facade of imperial unity could not last forever. Deep cracks were forming in the foundations of the Habsburg realm, fractures driven by religious fervor, nationalist resentment, and the heavy-handed rule of the Catholic emperors. Nowhere were these tensions more volatile than in the Kingdom of Bohemia, a crown land with a proud history of independence and a large population of Protestants who cherished their religious freedoms. When the devoutly Catholic Emperor Matthias and his chosen successor, Archduke Ferdinand of Styria, began systematically revoking these freedoms and asserting absolute control, the Bohemian estates, the assembly of local nobles, saw their ancient rights being stripped away. It was in this powder keg of political and religious strife that the city of Prague became the stage for one of the most bizarre and consequential acts of rebellion in European history. And at the heart of the conspiracy, many believe, was a clandestine gathering of the very men sworn to uphold imperial authority, the Knights of the Golden Fleece. Just days before the 23rd of May, 1618, whispers coursed through the cobbled streets of Prague. It was said that a secret chapter of the order had convened within the fortified walls of Hradčany Castle. Officially, such a meeting would have been unthinkable without the sovereign's express command, and the sovereign, Emperor Matthias, was in Vienna, unaware and disapproving. This was not a chapter for pomp and ceremony, it was a council of war. Present were key Protestant members of the Bohemian nobility, men like Count Jindřich Matyáš Thurn and Vilém Slavata, who also wore the golden collar of the fleece. Their presence alone was a profound act of defiance. They were leveraging the order's legendary secrecy not to serve their emperor, but to plot against him, using the Brotherhood's private channels to coordinate a rebellion that would shake Europe to its core. In that hushed room, away from the spies of the imperial governors, the final plans were almost certainly laid. What was truly discussed in that clandestine gathering? The official statutes of the order demanded unwavering loyalty to the Catholic Church and the Habsburg sovereign. By attending, these knights were already walking a treacherous path. The discussions would have moved far beyond mere protest. They were likely weighing the ultimate act of treason, formally deposing the emperor's representatives in Prague and instigating a full-scale revolt. The knights in that room understood the colossal risk. Failure meant not just political ruin, but certain excommunication from the church and expulsion from the order they so revered. A loss of honor that was, to a Renaissance nobleman, a fate worse than death. Yet they proceeded, convinced that their higher duty was to the ancient liberties of Bohemia. The secret chapter provided them with a veil of deniability and a trusted network, transforming a scattered discontent into a unified, decisive conspiracy. Then, on that fateful morning of May 23rd, the conspiracy erupted into spectacular violence. A band of armed Protestant nobles, led by Count Thurn, stormed the royal palace and seized the two most hated imperial governors, Vilém Slavata and Jaroslav Borita of Martinis, along with their scribe Philip Fabricius. After a heated, theatrical trial, the rebels declared the men enemies of the Bohemian estates. In an act of stunning symbolism, they dragged the three officials to an open window of the palace council chamber and hurled them out, sending them plummeting some 50 feet into the dry moat below. This was the second defenestration of Prague, an event so shocking it would instantly become a legend. The rebels, perhaps expecting a divine sign, famously claimed the men survived their fall only by landing in a soft pile of manure, a miracle the Catholics attributed to the intervention of angels, while the Protestants joked was the work of the devil. The crucial, haunting question is this: were the Knights of the Golden Fleece merely witnesses, or were they the chief architects of this act? The presence of key conspirators at the alleged secret chapter points heavily toward the latter. The defenestration was not a spontaneous riot. It was a meticulously planned political assassination attempt disguised as popular justice. The choice of victims, the theatrical nature of the trial, and the immediate seizure of power that followed all bear the hallmarks of a calculated strike, the kind that would be debated and authorized in a secret council of state, exactly the function the order's chapters were meant to serve. By using their fraternity structures to orchestrate this rebellion, these knights were perverting the fleece's original purpose, turning an instrument of imperial unity into a weapon of revolution. They were not just throwing men from a window, they were throwing down a gauntlet to the entire Habsburg dynasty. The immediate aftermath proved how deliberate their actions were. The rebels quickly established a provisional government and raised an army, electing a new Protestant king to replace Ferdinand. They had ignited a fuse that would set off the 30 Years' War, a continent-spanning conflict of unimaginable brutality that would devastate Central Europe and claim millions of lives. The secret meeting in Prague was the spark. It demonstrates that by the 17th century, the Order of the Golden Fleece was no longer a monolithic block of loyalists. It had become a mirror of the empire itself, fractured by internal divisions. Its sacred oaths stretched to the breaking point by conflicting loyalties to faith, crown, and homeland. The golden collar could no longer mask the deep ideological cracks that would soon plunge an entire continent into decades of fire and blood. To understand this tantalizing possibility, we must first move beyond the modern caricature of alchemy as mere foolish greed. For its true practitioners, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone was never just about transmuting lead into physical gold. It was a profound spiritual and philosophical system, a symbolic journey of inner purification known as the Great Work. The alchemist sought to take the base, unrefined matter of his own soul, represented by lead, and through a series of intricate processes involving dissolution, purification, and recombination, transform it into spiritual gold, a state of perfect wisdom, virtue, and enlightenment. The laboratory experiments were an external mirror of an intense internal transformation. When we re-examine the Order of the Golden Fleece through this lens, its entire structure begins to look less like a courtly fraternity and more like a carefully designed alchemical vessel. Consider the specific individuals involved. We have concrete historical records of knights who were not merely patrons but active, dedicated alchemists. Take, for instance, the influential 15th century knight Jean de Berry. While better known as a legendary art collector, his court was a veritable hub for alchemical studies, filled with scholars and texts dedicated to the great work. Even more compelling is the case of the 17th century Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, a sovereign of the order who moved his capital to Prague, transforming the city into the alchemical center of Europe. Rudolf's court swarmed with renowned adepts like John Dee and Edward Kelly, and he personally spent countless hours in his laboratories, not merely dabbling but deeply immersed in the search for the stone. These were not fringe members, they were sovereigns and key figures within the Brotherhood, lending immense credibility to the idea that esoteric knowledge was not just tolerated within the Golden Fleece, but actively cultivated and protected by its highest ranks. Now look again at the Order's most famous icon, the magnificent golden collar. Its design, so often explained in conventional terms, reveals a startling new dimension when viewed as an alchemical recipe. The collar is composed of two alternating elements, fire steels shaped like the letter B, and flints that appear to emit fiery sparks. In the standard interpretation, these represent the knight's fiery faith. But in the symbolic language of alchemy, fire is the primary agent of transformation. It is the heat of the athona, the alchemical furnace that must be maintained at a precise, constant temperature for the entire process to succeed. The flints and steels striking together to create a spark perfectly symbolize the necessary conjunction of opposing forces, sulfur and mercury, the fixed and the volatile, the male and female principles whose union ignites the entire transformative sequence. The Golden Fleece itself, hanging from this chain of fire, could then be seen as the ultimate goal. The Philosopher's Stone, often described in texts as a material with a wool-like crystalline texture, or as the final, perfected state of the matter being worked upon. The entire collar, worn close to the body, becomes a wearable diagram of the great work, a constant, silent reminder of the spiritual journey each knight was undertaking. This interpretation transforms the Order's famous statutes from a simple code of conduct into a set of alchemical instructions. The knight's required moral purity, his unwavering piety, and his commitment to justice can be read as the initial stage of the work, the purification of the base material, which is the knight's own character. The secretive chapter meetings, held behind closed doors and shielded from the public eye, mirror the alchemical maxim to work in darkness, protecting the sacred mysteries from the uninitiated. The very structure of the order, with its 24 knights plus the sovereign, echoes the numerological significance found in alchemical texts, where numbers held keys to cosmic harmony and the stages of transformation. Even the name Golden Fleece finds a powerful parallel in alchemical tradition. Several key texts, including the influential Rosarium Philosophorum, use the image of a fleece or a lamb as a symbol for the purified final product of the work. The quest of Jason and the Argonauts was itself a popular allegory for the alchemical process, a perilous journey across unknown seas to retrieve a divine, transformative object. The Knights of the Golden Fleece, therefore, were not just named after a myth, they were embodying the central allegory of their hidden spiritual practice. Was the Order, then, a secret society dedicated to the great work? The evidence strongly suggests that for a significant number of its members across centuries, the answer is yes. It provided a perfect cover. Its public face was one of impeccable Christian orthodoxy and feudal loyalty, deflecting suspicion from the Church, which often viewed alchemy with deep distrust. Yet, within the privacy of their chapters and personal networks, these knight adepts could pursue their dual quest for spiritual and material perfection. They were guardians not of a single physical philosopher's stone, but of the entire living tradition of the great work, using their immense wealth and political influence to protect and advance this arcane knowledge through a volatile world. The Golden Collar was their public banner and their secret schematic, a masterwork of symbolism that declared their chivalric virtue to the masses while whispering the formulas of transformation to those with the eyes to see and the mind to understand. We've traced the political rise, the secret allegiances, and the spiritual mysteries surrounding the Knights of the Golden Fleece, but one tantalizing question has echoed through the ages, captivating treasure hunters and historians alike. What happened to the fabled wealth of the Burgundian dukes? The immense fortune accumulated by Philip the Good and Charles the Bold was legendary even in their own time. A vast reservoir of gold, jewels, and precious artifacts drawn from the richest lands in Europe. This was not merely the private treasury of a ruler, it was the economic engine of a would-be kingdom, and its sudden disappearance following the death of Charles the Bold has fueled 5 centuries of speculation that the Order itself became the guardian of a lost hoard of unimaginable value. To understand the scale of what might have been lost, we need to grasp the sheer volume of revenue flowing into the ducal coffers. Burgundy's wealth was built on 2 powerful pillars, a highly efficient and ruthless taxation system, and its absolute dominance of the European wool and cloth trade. The dukes levied heavy taxes on their prosperous cities like Ghent, Bruges, and Antwerp, and they controlled the lucrative trade routes along which English wool was imported and transformed into the fine textiles that clothed the continent's elite. Contemporaries wrote of treasure chambers overflowing with sacks of gold coin, chests of pearls and diamonds, and religious relics adorned with priceless gemstones. Charles the Bold, in particular, was known to travel with a portable treasury to finance his constant wars, a mobile fortune that vanished with him on the battlefield at Nancy. The central mystery begins at that precise moment of catastrophe. When Charles was killed, his camp was looted by the victorious Swiss and Lorrainers. They undoubtedly carried off chests of coin and portable wealth, but the bulk of the Burgundian treasury, the consolidated wealth of the duchy, was nowhere to be found. It simply wasn't with the army. So where was it? This is where the role of the Order of the Golden Fleece becomes critical. As the most trusted and resilient institution of the Burgundian state, it possessed the network, the loyalty, and the secrecy required to safeguard such a treasure in a time of crisis. The knights were spread across key fortified cities and held positions of great authority. It is entirely plausible that in the chaotic days following Charles's death, as his daughter Mary fought to secure her inheritance, a secret directive was issued to disperse or conceal the treasury to prevent it from falling into the hands of the French king, Louis XI, who was actively seizing Burgundian land. The order provided the perfect clandestine channel to execute such a plan. One persistent theory suggests the treasure was physically hidden in a location known only to the highest-ranking knights. Endless speculation has pointed to the ducal tombs like the one of Philip the Good in Dijon, or to the crypts of churches historically associated with the order. Others believe it was transported to the relative safety of the Habsburg domains after Mary's marriage, integrated into the imperial treasury in Vienna or a stronghold in the Netherlands. Yet, inventories from the early Habsburg period show no single massive infusion of Burgundian wealth, which implies that if it was absorbed, it was done so quietly and in a way that left no obvious paper trail, exactly the kind of discreet operation the Fleece was designed for. A more compelling and perhaps more likely scenario is that the treasure was never a single, buried chest to be found, but was instead systematically liquidated and dispersed to fund the very survival of the Burgundian legacy. Mary of Burgundy and her Habsburg husband Maximilian were immediately plunged into a desperate war for their inheritance. Raising and supplying armies is an astronomically expensive endeavor. The lost treasure may have been spent over just a few years, its gold converted into soldiers' pay, weapons, and alliances, its jewels pawned to Genoese or German bankers to secure massive loans. In this view, the treasure wasn't lost, it was transmuted, its substance becoming the military might that preserved the Netherlands for the Habsburgs. The order would have been the natural custodian of this process, its members overseeing the strategic allocation of funds to ensure the dynasty's continuity. This leads us to the final, enduring question. Does any of this legendary wealth still await discovery, perhaps guarded by the order's modern heirs? The sovereign military order of Malta and the contemporary Austrian order of the Golden Fleece, as successors in a long tradition of chivalric secrecy, are often cited as the potential modern guardians of this legacy, not necessarily of physical gold, but of the knowledge of its final disposition. While it is romantic to imagine a vault deep beneath a Viennese palace holding the intact treasure of the dukes, it is far more probable that the true, enduring treasure of the Golden Fleece was never the gold itself. The real, lasting value was the financial and political network the order preserved, a system of credit, influence, and loyalty that proved far more valuable and resilient than any static hoard of metal and stones. The treasure was spent, but it purchased something priceless, the survival and elevation of the Burgundian Habsburg legacy into a world-spanning empire. The quest for the Fleece, in the end, was always about something more than gold. To trace the secret history of the order is to follow the lives of the Grand Masters who wore its sovereign collar, for their personal ambitions and dramatic failures are etched into the very soul of the Brotherhood. Our journey begins with the man who inherited the Fleece and nearly broke it with the sheer force of his will, Charles the Bold, the son of the Order's illustrious founder, Philip the Good. Charles was a figure of terrifying ambition, a man possessed by a single, all-consuming vision to be crowned a king. His father had built the Order as a tool for consolidating power. Charles wielded it as a weapon for conquest. He pushed the Order's statutes to their absolute limit, using the sacred chapter meetings not for reflection and unity, but to demand ever greater financial subsidies and military levies from his knights. He transformed the golden collar from a symbol of chivalric fellowship into a chain of command, binding his nobility to a relentless war machine. The mystery surrounding Charles's tenure is not one of hidden rituals, but of a hidden desperation. His quest for a crown was so fervent that it blinded him to the political realities of Europe, alienating allies and forging a coalition of enemies that would ultimately destroy him. The Order, in his hands, became a reflection of his own hubris, a glittering, powerful institution being driven at full tilt toward a precipice. His tragic death on the battlefield at Nancy, his body lost and looted, is one of history's great cautionary tales. It demonstrated with brutal clarity the limits of the order's power when led by a sovereign whose vision outstripped his wisdom, leaving the entire Burgundian legacy and the future of the fleece itself hanging in the balance. From the wreckage of Charles's ambition arose a master of political survival, a man who would deftly use the order to secure a legacy far greater than any kingdom, Emperor Maximilian I of Habsburg. As the husband of Charles's daughter, Mary, Maximilian inherited the sovereignty of the Golden Fleece not by blood, but by marriage and sheer force of circumstance. He was the ultimate pragmatist, and he recognized the order for what it was: a ready-made network of the most powerful men in Western Europe, a political instrument of immense value. Where Charles had used the fleece to demand, Maximilian used it to bind and persuade. He skillfully deployed membership as the ultimate diplomatic currency, bestowing the coveted collar on German princes, Italian condottieri, and Spanish grandees, weaving a web of personal loyalty that stretched across the continent and underpinned the meteoric rise of the House of Habsburg. The secret of Maximilian's success with the order lay in his understanding of its intangible power. He was a brilliant propagandist, and he used the fleece's chivalric mystique to craft his own public image as the last knight, a Christian warrior prince. Behind this romantic facade, however, the order's chapters became a covert council of state, a place where the practical business of governing a scattered empire could be conducted away from the public eye. Under Maximilian, the Golden Fleece completed its transition from a Burgundian court order to a central pillar of Habsburg imperial governance, its mysteries now serving the cold, calculated logic of dynastic expansion. Centuries later, as the world convulsed in the fires of the First World War, the order found its sovereign in a figure of profound tragedy, the last Habsburg emperor, blessed Karl I of Austria. His reign from 1916 to 1918 was arguably the most heartbreaking of any Grand Master, a tenure defined by a desperate and secret quest not for power but for peace. Emperor Karl inherited the throne of a crumbling, multi-ethnic empire and the leadership of the Golden Fleece at its moment of greatest peril. While his armies were locked in a brutal war of attrition, Karl undertook a series of clandestine diplomatic initiatives, famously using his brother-in-law, Prince Sixtus of Bourbon-Parma, as a covert channel to negotiate a separate peace with the Allies. This was the ultimate secret chapter of his leadership, a mission conducted in the shadows that, had it succeeded, might have saved millions of lives and preserved the Austro-Hungarian state. The failure of these Sixtus affair negotiations and their subsequent public exposure destroyed his credibility with Germany and shattered his authority at home. Here, the secret history of the order intersects with the emperor's personal piety and his final mysterious days. After the war, exiled and dying prematurely on the island of Madeira in 1922, the question of the order's sovereignty became a profound enigma. Karl never formally abdicated his role as Grand Master. He died believing himself to be the rightful sovereign, and for many loyal monarchists, the authority of the fleece passed with him into a kind of spiritual limbo. His personal devotion, which led to his beatification by the Catholic Church, adds a layer of sanctity to this final chapter. Was he the last true Grand Master, his tenure cut short by the violent end of empires? Or was his reign a testament to the order's ultimate powerlessness in the face of 20th century ideological forces? The legacy of Karl I imbues the modern order with a haunting, elegiac quality, a reminder that its deepest secrets are not always of power and triumph, but sometimes of faith, loss, and a noble failure that echoes through the corridors of history. To become a Knight of the Golden Fleece was to cross a threshold into a world of profound obligation, an initiation steeped in sacred theater. The ceremony was a meticulously choreographed blend of religious devotion and feudal commitment, designed to impress upon the new member the immense gravity of the honor being bestowed. Before the assembled order in a grand cathedral, the candidate would first be stripped of his armor and weapons, a powerful symbol of shedding his former self and approaching the brotherhood with humility. He would then be clothed in the specific, symbolic vestments of the order, a visual transformation marking his new identity. The climax of the ritual was the oath itself, sworn upon a beautifully illuminated copy of the order's statutes. With his hand on the holy text, the knight pledged his unwavering loyalty to three distinct entities: to God and the Catholic Church, to the sovereign of the order, the Duke of Burgundy, or later, the Habsburg Emperor, and to the statutes and fellow knights of the Golden Fleece itself. This was not a vague promise of good behavior. It was a multi-layered vow that bound his soul, his sword, and his political allegiance into a single, unbreakable chain, forging a connection considered more sacred than any other feudal tie. Yet the true heart of the order's mysterious power did not lie in these public ceremonies, but in what followed, the closed-door chapter meetings. While the processions and masses were a spectacle for the court, the chapters were strictly private, convened behind locked and guarded doors. Only the knights and a handful of essential officers were permitted inside, and what transpired within was considered so confidential that even the sovereign's closest advisors were often excluded. This intense secrecy immediately fueled rampant speculation among contemporaries and has tantalized historians ever since. What required such absolute privacy if the order was merely a straightforward chivalric fraternity? The official business discussed was weighty enough: internal disputes between members, matters of state security, and the review of the knight's conduct. But the persistent rumors suggest a deeper, more esoteric layer to these gatherings. Whispers circulated for centuries that during these sessions, knights swore a second, secret oath, an oath that superseded even the public one, binding them to the hidden purposes of the order. This alleged pledge was said to involve a vow of silence so absolute that revealing the order's innermost secrets was punishable by a fate considered worse than death. The order's statutes enshrined this culture of secrecy with terrifyingly severe penalties. The most infamous punishment for a knight found guilty of treason, heresy, or revealing the order's confidential affairs was not just expulsion, but a symbolic and brutal posthumous erasure. The condemned knight would be stripped of his honors, his coat of arms defaced or hung upside down in a public ceremony of degradation, and his memory officially expunged from the order's records. In extreme cases, it was even decreed that his depiction in any group portrait or tapestry would be physically cut out or painted over, a literal airbrushing from history meant to annihilate his very existence within the brotherhood. This draconian response to betrayal reveals an institution fiercely protective of its internal world. It wasn't merely punishing a breach of protocol. It was defending the sanctity of a private sphere where the most sensitive matters of faith, state, and perhaps even esoteric knowledge were debated and decided. The message was clear: the bond between knights and the secrets they shared were inviolable, protected by a code of silence whose enforcement was as absolute as it was merciless. This rigorous enforcement of secrecy inevitably leads to the most compelling questions about the order's true nature. What were they so desperate to protect? Beyond discussions of troop movements and diplomatic strategy, the private chapters provided the perfect environment for rituals and practices that would have raised eyebrows or even accusations of heresy if conducted in the open. The order's deep connection to the myth of the Argonauts and the ambiguous symbolism of the fleece itself provided a rich symbolic language that could easily support more initiatory rites. Some theorists propose that these closed-door meetings were where the order's alleged alchemical interests were practically explored, not just discussed as philosophy. Could knights have participated in symbolic rituals representing the stages of the great work, using their collars and other regalia as physical props in a spiritual drama of death and rebirth? Others, pointing to the Templar connection, suggest the chapters were where a more heterodox form of spirituality was preserved, a syncretic blend of Christian mysticism and classical wisdom deemed too dangerous for the uninitiated masses. The absolute silence demanded of the knights ensured that if such rites existed, they would leave no explicit record, only the compelling circumstantial evidence of their interests and the formidable apparatus they built to keep their own affairs hidden from the world. Given the Order's legendary commitment to secrecy and the immense scope of their political and intellectual activities, it is almost impossible to believe they did not maintain some form of centralized repository for their most sensitive records. Imagine, if you will, a library unlike any other, not of public knowledge but of private power, a clandestine archive containing the true, unvarnished minutes of their secret chapters, detailed dossiers on friends and enemies across Europe, and perhaps even texts deemed too dangerous or heretical for the outside world. This was not a library for scholars, but for sovereigns and their most trusted knights, a locked treasure chest of state secrets and esoteric wisdom. While no single physical library of the Golden Fleece has ever been discovered, the circumstantial evidence for its existence, or at least for a dispersed but organized system of record-keeping, is compelling. We know that the Order's chancery produced a vast quantity of documents, membership rolls, financial accounts, and the meticulously detailed statutes. Yet the most revealing documents, the transcripts of what was actually said behind those closed doors, are conspicuously absent from the official record. This absence itself is a kind of evidence pointing to a deliberate policy of secrecy, where the most sensitive writings were either kept in a separate, highly guarded location or systematically destroyed after their usefulness had passed. The logistical needs of governing a pan-European network of the elite would have necessitated a secure clearinghouse for intelligence. How else could a sovereign in Brussels understand the political landscape in Castile or the military readiness of a border territory without detailed, confidential reports from his knights stationed there? This hypothetical archive would have been the memory of the Order, the place where the real history of their influence was written, away from the glittering facade of their public ceremonies. The contents of such an archive would have been explosive, ranging from the politically incendiary to the philosophically radical. At a practical level, it would have held the raw, unedited accounts of their political machinations, secret treaties negotiated before their official signing, assessments of the weaknesses of rival monarchs, and intricate plans for economic manipulation or military campaigns. Beyond these earthly schemes, many theorists believe it could have housed a different kind of treasure altogether, a collection of forbidden knowledge. Given the well-documented interest of several sovereigns and knights in alchemy, it is plausible that this library contained rare alchemical manuscripts detailing processes for transmutation and spiritual purification that went far beyond the mainstream science of the day. In an age of religious schism and persecution, it might also have safeguarded theological texts that challenged church doctrine, or heretical works by Cathars or other suppressed sects, preserving ideas that could have cost a man his life if discovered in his possession. The very nature of the Order's ambiguous symbol, the Golden Fleece, suggests a comfort with layered, non-literal interpretations of truth, the kind of mindset that would value and protect heterodox ideas. This library would not have been a single room in a castle, but likely a distributed system with key texts held by trusted knights or in the private collections of the sovereign, all catalogued in a way known only to the innermost circle. The destruction of the Burgundian state and the subsequent dispersal of its assets could have scattered this collection to the winds, its individual components surviving but their connection to the Order's secret knowledge lost, waiting to be recognized in a forgotten corner of a modern archive or private collection. To protect the secrets such a library contained, the Order would have needed more than locked doors and sworn oaths. They would have required a sophisticated method of secure communication. The vast distances between their members and the constant threat of interception by spies demanded a system of coded correspondence. While no explicit cipher of the Golden Fleece has been definitively proven, Historians have identified patterns in their diplomatic letters that suggest the use of steganography, the art of hiding messages within an innocent-seeming text, and simple ciphers such as letter substitution, which were the state of the art in Renaissance cryptography. A letter discussing the mundane details of a wool shipment or the planning of a religious festival could easily have contained a second, hidden layer of instruction, decipherable only to a knight who knew the key. The need for such secrecy is vividly illustrated by the Prague defenestration plot. Coordinating such a high-stakes rebellion across a kingdom would have been impossible without a reliable and covert means of communication between the conspirators. The Order's own chapter meetings, which often took months to arrange, would have required extensive preliminary correspondence to set the agenda, correspondence that would have been highly vulnerable to interception. It is almost a certainty that the knights developed and refined their own cryptographic methods over the centuries, their techniques evolving alongside the growing sophistication of espionage in early modern Europe. Perhaps the most beautiful and enduring theory, however, is that the Order's most profound secrets were not hidden in locked libraries or coded letters, but were encoded in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of the art they so lavishly patronized. The Burgundian and Habsburg courts were among the greatest centers of artistic production in European history, commissioning breathtaking works from painters like Jan van Eyck, Rogier van der Weyden, and later Pieter Paul Rubens. These masterpieces, brimming with meticulously rendered detail, provided the perfect medium for a visual language of symbols. An everyday object in a painting, an extinguished candle, a specific variety of flower, a reflection in a convex mirror could carry a specific meaning to an initiate. The famed Ghent altarpiece, commissioned by a wealthy burgher with close ties to the ducal court, is a veritable forest of complex symbolism that art historians are still deciphering today. Could the magnificent panel of the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb also contain a hidden narrative about the Order's own mystical quest, or consider the portraits of knights themselves, often depicted wearing their golden collars? The arrangement of the flints and steels, the angle at which the fleece hangs, or the other objects included in the painting could have served as a form of silent communication or a record of the subject's rank and achievements within the Brotherhood, a code understood only by fellow members. This method of steganography would have been virtually foolproof, as the messages were protected not by complex ciphers, but by their own artistic excellence, hiding the secret in the realm of the aesthetic where only those with the proper intellectual and spiritual keys would even think to look for it. The enduring mystery of the Order's hidden knowledge ultimately leads us to a pivotal, haunting question. If such a vast repository of secrets ever existed, what was its final fate? The most likely scenario is one of dissolution and dispersal rather than dramatic destruction. The gradual decline of the Habsburg Empire and the secularization of Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries would have rendered such a centralized, secret archive increasingly anachronistic and difficult to maintain. As the Order's political power waned, its most sensitive documents may have been quietly transferred to the private collections of successive sovereigns or scattered among the ancestral holdings of various knightly families. Pieces of the puzzle could very well survive today, slumbering unrecognized in the vaults of the Austrian National Library, the archives of the Vatican, or the manor houses of old aristocratic families across the continent. A seemingly mundane inventory list from a 17th century castle, or a beautifully illuminated manuscript with unusual marginalia, might be a fragment of this lost library, waiting for a researcher to recognize its true provenance. The greatest secret the Knights of the Golden Fleece may have left us is not a single truth, but the lingering possibility that their most profound legacy, a complete record of their hidden history, still exists in fragments, challenging us to piece together the full picture of an organization that mastered the arts of secrecy, power, and symbolic communication for over 500 years. To truly understand the secret language of the Knights of the Golden Fleece, We must learn to see with their eyes, to look past the obvious beauty of the art they commissioned and into the layers of meaning they carefully concealed within it. The magnificent tapestries and paintings that adorned their palaces and chapter houses were far more than simple decorations. They were a sophisticated visual cipher, a way to communicate dangerous ideas and affirm political loyalties in plain sight, safe from the understanding of the uninitiated. These works, created by the finest artists of the age, transformed their halls into a gallery of hidden messages, where every color, every object, and every narrative detail could carry a double meaning known only to the Brotherhood. One of the most compelling examples is the grand cycle of tapestries depicting the story of Jason and the Argonauts, a project directly funded by the Order's founding patron, Duke Philip the Good. To the average courtier, these vast, woven masterpieces were a thrilling retelling of a classical myth, a celebration of heroic adventure that mirrored the Order's public ideals. But for a knight wearing the golden collar, the imagery would have resonated on an entirely different frequency. The figure of Jason was not just a legendary hero, he was a stand-in for the Duke himself, the leader of a band of elite brothers on a sacred quest. The Golden Fleece, shimmering in the tapestry's threads, was not merely a mythical prize but a direct representation of their own Order's enigmatic symbol. The treacherous journey, the trials overcome, and the final triumphant retrieval all served as a powerful allegory for the knight's own lifelong mission of spiritual and political striving, reinforcing their unique identity as modern-day Argonauts every time they gathered in its presence. This coded language becomes even more precise and personal in the solemn portraits of individual knights, particularly those painted by masters like Rogier van der Weyden. Take, for instance, his famous portrait of the Knight of the Golden Fleece, often identified as either Jean de Gros or Antoine, the Grand Bâtard of Burgundy. The subject is presented with stark realism, his face etched with the cares of the world. Yet, the true narrative is told not in his expression, but in the meticulously rendered details that surround him. His hands are clasped in prayer, a standard sign of piety, but the specific positioning of his fingers could have held significance for those aware of the Order's secret rituals. More overt is the presence of the Order's collar itself, which van der Weyden paints with astonishing detail. Each fire steel and flint is individually articulated, not as a generic piece of jewelry, but as the specific, recognizable regalia of the Brotherhood. The way the light catches the gold communicates not just wealth, but divine illumination, suggesting that the wearer is illuminated by the very faith the sparks represent. The setting is equally telling. He stands before a plain, dark background, stripped of any worldly context. This forces the viewer to focus entirely on the man and his insignia, emphasizing that his primary, defining identity is his membership in the Order. It is a visual declaration that his power and his soul are inextricably linked to this fraternity, a silent oath made visible for all to see, yet fully understood by only a chosen few. Perhaps the ultimate masterpiece of this visual cryptography is Jan van Eyck's The Virgin and Child with Chancellor Rollin, painted for Nicholas Rollin, the powerful chancellor to Philip the Good and a key figure in the Burgundian court. On the surface, it is a serene religious scene. The Chancellor kneels in devotion before the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. But Van Eyck, a painter known for his almost microscopic detail, has filled this peaceful vision with a wealth of symbolic imagery that scholars are still deciphering. The expansive landscape seen through the Logia's arches is not a generic backdrop. It is a meticulously detailed panorama of a wealthy, orderly city, likely a representation of the Burgundian state itself, prosperous and well-governed under Rollin's stewardship. The peacocks on the balustrade, symbols of immortality and resurrection, hint at the eternal rewards for pious service. Most intriguingly, the entire composition can be read as a political statement. By placing himself, a high-ranking official, in such intimate and direct contact with the holy figures, Roland is visually asserting the divine right and spiritual authority of the Burgundian regime he served. For a fellow Knight of the Fleece viewing this painting, the message would be clear. Their political order was blessed by heaven, and their earthly power was a reflection of a divine plan. The artwork thus functions on three simultaneous levels: as a personal devotional image, as a piece of political propaganda, and as a complex emblem of the order's worldview, where spiritual grace and temporal power were seamlessly intertwined. The hidden messages were not always so subtle. Sometimes they were woven into the very fabric of historical commemoration. The magnificent Burgundian narrative tapestries that depicted contemporary events like military victories or ducal weddings served as a powerful tool for shaping public perception. In these vast, colorful narratives, the Knights of the Order would be prominently displayed, their golden collars gleaming, positioned as the heroic protagonists of the story. A tapestry showing the siege of a city, for instance, would inevitably highlight the bravery of the Fleece's knights, reinforcing their role as the protectors and enforcers of Burgundian might. The arrangement of figures, the banners flown, and the heraldic devices shown were all part of a carefully constructed visual language that communicated alliances, asserted dominance, and recorded history from a distinctly Burgundian perspective. These tapestries were mobile and often displayed during diplomatic meetings or grand festivities, making them a form of soft power. A visiting ambassador would not only see the wealth of the Duke who could commission such works, but would also receive a clear, unspoken message about the unity, military prowess, and divinely sanctioned authority of the order that stood behind the throne. In this way, art became an extension of statecraft, and the trained eye could read the shifting alliances and political priorities of the Burgundian court simply by observing which knights were featured most prominently in the latest woven masterpiece. Ultimately, this tradition of encoding secrets in art reveals a fundamental truth about the Knights of the Golden Fleece. Their greatest strength lay in their ability to operate on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. To the public, they were paragons of chivalry, their virtue celebrated in vibrant pigments and golden threads. To the initiated brother, these same artworks were a constant reinforcement of their secret oaths, their political mission, and their unique spiritual identity. The paintings and tapestries were their silent chronicles, their confidential bulletins, and their spiritual manuals, all disguised as magnificent decorations. This sophisticated use of imagery allowed them to build a cohesive ideological fortress, its walls painted with scenes that inspired the masses while whispering clandestine instructions to the inner circle. The true cipher was not a specific code to be broken, but a mindset to be adopted, a way of seeing the world in layers, where every symbol held a deeper truth and every masterpiece was a key to a door visible only to those who knew it was there. That glittering unity, so carefully maintained by the Habsburgs for over 2 centuries, finally shattered in the early 18th century, not with a whisper, but with the thunder of cannons and the clashing of dynastic ambitions. The War of the Spanish Succession was a continent-wide conflagration, a brutal struggle over who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire after the last Habsburg king of Spain, Charles II, died without an heir. At stake was the balance of power in Europe, and entangled within this geopolitical catastrophe was the fate of the Order of the Golden Fleece itself. The conflict pitted 2 main claimants against each other: Philip of Anjou, the grandson of the powerful French king Louis XIV, and Archduke Charles of Austria, the younger son of the Holy Roman Emperor. When Philip was declared King Philip V of Spain, the Austrian Habsburgs and their allies refused to accept this massive expansion of French influence, and war engulfed the continent. For the Knights of the Golden Fleece, this created an impossible crisis of loyalty. Their sovereign, the Holy Roman Emperor, was at war with the man now sitting on the Spanish throne, who, by ancient tradition, was also their sovereign. The very foundation of the order, unquestioning fidelity to its reigning monarch, was ripped in two. The resolution, formalized by the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, did more than just redraw the map of Europe. It performed a kind of surgery on the ancient brotherhood. The treaty recognized Philip V as the legitimate king of Spain, but with a crucial caveat. He and his descendants were permanently excluded from inheriting the French throne. To solidify this new European order, a parallel separation had to occur within the Golden Fleece. The treaty effectively sanctioned a schism, creating two distinct and independent branches of the order: the Austrian Fleece, with its sovereignty residing in the Habsburg emperors in Vienna, and the Spanish Fleece, with its sovereignty now vested in the new Bourbon kings in Madrid. On the surface, this was a neat political solution to a thorny problem of protocol. But for an institution built on unity, secrecy, and a single, unbroken chain of command, this split represented a profound rupture. It forces us to ask whether this was simply a bureaucratic adjustment to a dynastic squabble, or something far more significant, a fracture in the very soul of the order, a division that may have also split its hidden knowledge and secret traditions down the middle. The immediate aftermath of the schism reveals a fascinating and telling divergence in character between the two new branches. The Austrian order, remaining with the original Habsburg line, became an institution deeply conservative, almost frozen in time. It clung tenaciously to its ancient statutes and its historic role as a pillar of the Holy Roman Empire, and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Its membership remained overwhelmingly Catholic and aristocratic, a reflection of the old, hierarchical world from which it sprang. The Austrian knights continued to see themselves as the true heirs of Philip the Good and Charles the Bold, the guardians of an unbroken tradition. In contrast, the Spanish branch, under the new Bourbon dynasty, demonstrated a surprising flexibility. The Spanish kings used the fleece as a tool of statecraft in a new way, bestowing the honor more freely on foreign allies, particularly other Bourbon princes in France, Naples, and Parma, weaving a new web of familial and political allegiance. This practice led to a unique phenomenon. A single individual could, theoretically, receive both the Austrian and Spanish fleeces, though the two branches remained legally and administratively separate. This highlighted a key difference in philosophy. For Vienna, the fleece was a sacred heirloom. For Madrid, it was a dynamic instrument of foreign policy. This fundamental divergence inevitably leads to one of the most captivating mysteries spawned by the schism. What happened to the order's legendary secrets? If the Golden Fleece was indeed the guardian of a clandestine archive, forbidden knowledge, or unique rituals, did it remain with the Austrian branch, seen as the legitimate continuation? Or was it duplicated with copies of crucial documents sent to Madrid? Perhaps the secrets were themselves divided, with each branch inheriting only a portion of the whole, like a key broken in two. There is no historical document that provides a clear answer, which only fuels the speculation. Consider the order's alleged connections to alchemy and esoteric traditions. The Austrian court, particularly under the mystical Emperor Rudolf II, had been a historic center for such pursuits. It is plausible that the Viennese branch retained this deeper, spiritual dimension, viewing the fleece as a vessel for inner transformation. The Spanish Bourbons, arriving from the more rigidly orthodox court of Versailles, might have been less interested in these hermetic aspects, focusing instead on the order's tangible political and diplomatic power. The schism, therefore, may not have just created two administrative bodies, but two different interpretations of the order's core identity, one mystical and traditional, the other pragmatic and modern. The legacy of this great divide endures to this very day. Both the Austrian and Spanish orders of the Golden Fleece continue to exist as separate entities among the most prestigious chivalric orders in the world. The Austrian order, now a Catholic religious order, is still awarded by the head of the House of Habsburg as a private honor, a living relic of a lost empire. The Spanish order remains a state honor conferred by the King of Spain, and its membership includes influential figures from across the globe. This enduring separation is a permanent reminder of that early 18th century conflict. It stands as a testament to the fact that even an institution as powerful and secretive as the Golden Fleece was not immune to the seismic shifts of geopolitics. The schism proves that the order was not a monolithic entity existing outside of history, but was deeply woven into its fabric, susceptible to the same forces of division and change that shaped the modern world. The existence of two Golden Fleeces, born from a single, legendary brotherhood, forever challenges us to wonder if the full, unvarnished truth of its ancient mysteries is now known only in parts, its complete story waiting for someone to reunite the separated threads. Yet even as the Order navigated the treacherous waters of dynastic schism, a far greater storm was gathering on the horizon, one that would challenge its very existence. The 18th century, the so-called Age of Enlightenment, ushered in a new way of thinking that was fundamentally at odds with the world that had created the Golden Fleece. Philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau championed reason, individual liberty, and the rights of man, while openly mocking the superstition, privilege, and hereditary hierarchy that were the bedrock of aristocratic orders. In the bustling coffeehouses and salons of Europe, the idea of a secret brotherhood of knights bound by medieval oaths was increasingly seen as a quaint, if not ridiculous, relic of a bygone era. For the Knights of the Golden Fleece, this intellectual shift was not merely an academic debate, it was an existential threat. The Order's power had always rested on a foundation of mystery and unquestioned tradition, and now that foundation was being systematically dismantled by the sharp tools of skepticism and rationalism. The challenge was no longer which king to serve, but whether the very concept of a king or a knight had any place in the modern world. This philosophical assault soon turned into a physical one with the cataclysm of the French Revolution. In 1789, the world the Order knew was turned upside down. The absolute monarchy in France, a sister kingdom to the Spanish Bourbons and a constant player in the Order's history, was violently overthrown. The new revolutionary government, driven by a fervent anti-clerical and anti-aristocratic zeal, moved swiftly to abolish all chivalric orders and feudal titles. For the Knights of the Golden Fleece, the terror reached a horrifying climax during the Reign of Terror. King Louis XVI of France, a sovereign of the Spanish branch of the Order, was executed by guillotine in January 1793. His death was not just the killing of a monarch, it was a symbolic decapitation of the entire ancient regime. The revolutionaries were publicly executing the very principles of hereditary honor and sacred loyalty that the Golden Collar represented. In the following years, as revolutionary armies swept across Europe, they brought their iconoclastic fury with them, systematically dismantling the old structures of power. For the first time in centuries, the Knights of the Golden Fleece faced an enemy that did not want to join their order or manipulate it for gain, but sought to erase it completely from history. In the face of this unprecedented danger, the Order did what it had always done best. It retreated into the shadows to survive. The grand public chapter meetings, those magnificent displays of power that had once awed all of Europe, became impossibly dangerous. To gather in such a conspicuous way would be to invite arrest, confiscation, or worse. Instead, the Order's activities went deep underground. Communication between the sovereign in Vienna and his scattered knights became a matter of utmost secrecy, relying on trusted couriers and coded messages. The focus shifted from public spectacle to private preservation. Knights met in small, discreet groups in private homes or secluded country estates, far from the prying eyes of revolutionary agents. Their primary goal was no longer to influence state policy, but simply to safeguard their traditions, their records, and their regalia from destruction. The magnificent collars and jewels, once worn with pride in cathedral processions, were now hidden away in false-bottomed chests, behind concealed panels in castle walls, or entrusted to loyal servants for safekeeping. The order was, in effect, going into hibernation, preserving its core identity like a seed waiting for the political winter to pass. This period of forced secrecy was followed by the meteoric rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who represented a new, modern kind of power that was both a threat and a strange mirror to the old order. Napoleon had no use for inherited titles. He famously declared that a marshal's baton was carried in every soldier's knapsack, a philosophy of merit that stood in direct opposition to the Golden Fleece's ancient requirement of generations of noble lineage. He created his own Legion of Honor, a merit-based award open to commoners and soldiers alike, which was everything the Fleece was not: modern, egalitarian, and a tool of the state rather than a mystical brotherhood. Yet, in a fascinating twist, Napoleon also craved the legitimacy that only the old institutions could provide, after he dissolved the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, forcing the last Habsburg emperor to renounce the title. The sovereignty of the Austrian Fleece entered a state of legal limbo. Napoleon, now Emperor of the French, actively sought to absorb the prestige of the Golden Fleece. He pressured knights to join his Legion of Honor and reportedly coveted the order's regalia for his own coronation rituals, seeing in its ancient symbolism a key to legitimizing his own new dynasty. The order was now fighting a war on two fronts, against the revolutionary ideals that sought to destroy it, and against the imperial ambition that sought to co-opt and hollow out its meaning. The ultimate test of the order's resilience came during the French occupation of Vienna in 1809, and again during the tumultuous years of the Napoleonic Wars. As French troops marched into the Habsburg capital, the custodians of the order faced a moment of supreme crisis. The physical artifacts of the Brotherhood, its archive, its treasury, its sacred relics were in imminent danger of being seized as spoils of war. We know that a heroic, clandestine effort was undertaken to spirit these treasures away to safety. The details of this operation remain one of the Order's best-kept secrets from this era, but it almost certainly involved a trusted network of knights and loyalists moving the most precious items to remote monasteries, fortified castles in Hungary, or other locations deep within the Habsburg lands. This was not merely about protecting wealth, it was about protecting identity. The survival of these objects meant the survival of the Order's continuous history, a tangible thread linking the present to the age of Philip the Good. By successfully safeguarding its heart from Napoleon's grasp, the Golden Fleece demonstrated that its true strength lay not in its public political power, which had waned, but in the profound, unbreakable loyalty of its members and the enduring potency of its secret traditions. When the Congress of Vienna convened in 1815 to redraw the map of Europe after Napoleon's final defeat, the Knights of the Golden Fleece emerged from the shadows. The victorious powers, particularly the Austrian Chancellor Metternich, were determined to restore stability and the principle of legitimate monarchy. In this new conservative climate, the order found a renewed, if more muted, purpose. It was no longer the dynamic political engine it had been in the 15th century, but it became a powerful symbol of restoration and continuity, a living monument to the old Europe that had survived the fire of revolution. The Austrian Emperor, once again sovereign of the Fleece, used it to reinforce the resurrected Habsburg prestige. The Order's existence was a statement that not all ancient things had been swept away, that some institutions possessed a resilience that could withstand even the most violent storms of modernity. It had adapted by emphasizing its role as a guardian of tradition in a world now fearful of radical change, proving that its mysteries were not so much obsolete as they were timeless, capable of waiting in the dark until the world was once again ready for their particular kind of light. Stepping out of the smoke and tumult of the Napoleonic Wars and into the stark light of the 20th century, the Order of the Golden Fleece faced its most profound identity crisis yet. The world of absolute monarchy and divine right, the very ecosystem that had nurtured it for 500 years, was crumbling. Republics were rising, world wars would devastate old empires, and the very notion of an aristocracy based on bloodline was being challenged as never before. Yet, against all odds, both the Austrian and Spanish branches of the Fleece did not merely survive. They persist to this day, adapting to a world that has no official place for them. The story of their modern existence is a captivating study in how ancient institutions navigate a secular, democratic age, forcing us to ask whether they are living museums or if the embers of their old secrets still glow beneath the ceremonial ash. In Austria, the cataclysm came in 1918, with the final, irrevocable collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the First World War. The last reigning sovereign, blessed Karl I, was forced into exile, and the new Austrian Republic swiftly abolished all noble titles and privileges. Legally, the Habsburgs were now ordinary citizens. This should have been the death knell for the Austrian Order of the Golden Fleece. But in a masterful act of institutional preservation, the order underwent a radical transformation. It reconstituted itself not as a state order, but as a Catholic religious order of chivalry under the protection of the Church. The head of the House of Habsburg, today Karl von Habsburg, the grandson of the last emperor, remains its sovereign and grand master, but his authority is now purely dynastic, a matter of tradition and family heritage rather than state power. The modern Austrian knights, limited to a small, exclusive number, are still almost entirely Catholic men of verified noble lineage for 16 generations, a staggering requirement in the 21st century. Their ceremonies, while still steeped in solemn ritual, are now primarily religious events, often held in the Kapuzinerkirche in Vienna, the traditional burial place of the Habsburgs. The grandeur is muted, the political power is gone, but the aura of ancient, unbroken continuity remains palpable. Across Europe, the Spanish branch followed a different, though equally dramatic, path. It remained a dynastic order of the Spanish monarchy, but its survival was twice thrown into jeopardy by the 20th century's political storms. First, in 1931, King Alfonso XIII was forced into exile with the proclamation of the Second Spanish Republic, which once again sought to sweep away the symbols of the old regime. For several years, the fate of the Spanish Fleece hung in the balance. Then, in a stunning reversal, the monarchy was restored in 1947, and the order was revived with it. Its greatest test, however, came after the death of the dictator Francisco Franco in 1975. The new king, Juan Carlos I, faced the monumental task of guiding Spain from dictatorship to a modern democratic constitutional monarchy. In this new framework, the Golden Fleece found a renewed, symbolic purpose. While the Austrian order retreated into a private, religious sphere, the Spanish Fleece was brought into the light as a tool of the modern state. King Felipe VI, the current sovereign, bestows the collar not only on Spanish grandees but strategically on foreign heads of state, such as former Japanese Emperor Akihito, and on influential commoners who have served Spain with distinction. This modernizes the order, breaking the ancient bloodline requirement and transforming it from a bastion of aristocratic privilege into a flexible, high-level honor for service to the crown and nation. This fundamental difference in character between the two branches is most vividly displayed in their modern ceremonies. An investiture in the Austrian order is an intensely private, almost clandestine affair by contemporary standards. It is a deeply religious mass closed to the public and the media, where the atmosphere is one of hushed reverence and historical solemnity. The focus is inward on the spiritual bond between the knights and the centuries of tradition they represent. In stark contrast, a Spanish investiture is a state occasion, a public spectacle of monarchy designed for the television age. It is held with full pomp in a historic venue like the Royal Palace of Madrid, with the king and knights in formal dress broadcast for the nation to see. The ritual is no less meaningful, but its purpose is external, to project an image of a stable, timeless monarchy at the heart of a modern Spain. One branch cultivates mystery through seclusion, the other projects power through pageantry. This divergence begs the question of what exactly is being preserved in each case. Is it the same institution, or have they evolved into two entirely different entities sharing only a name and a symbol? This brings us to the central, haunting enigma of the fleece in the modern era. In an age of digital transparency and relentless scrutiny, can any secret truly remain hidden? Do the knights of today, whether in Vienna or Madrid, still guard the ancient mysteries, the lost Templar knowledge, the alchemical formulas, the hidden archives? Or are they now merely gracious and dignified custodians of a beautiful, hollowed-out tradition? There are compelling arguments for both views. The skeptics would say the magic is long gone. The Order's original raison d'etre, to serve as a clandestine political council and a binding force for a pan-European elite, has been rendered obsolete by Parliament's international law and the Internet. The idea that a group of businessmen, retired diplomats and aristocrats in the 21st century are secretly practicing alchemy or guarding the lost treasure of the Burgundian duke seems, to put it mildly, far-fetched. From this perspective, the modern ceremonies are precisely that, ceremonies. They are powerful, emotionally resonant historical reenactments, but the inner circle, the true esoteric core, has vanished, its secrets lost to the relentless march of time and rationalism. Yet, a more intriguing possibility persists. Perhaps the nature of the secret has simply evolved. The original secrets may have been less about physical treasure maps and more about a specific way of wielding power, a philosophy of governance based on loyalty, discretion, and a long-term view that transcends the electoral cycle. In this reading, the modern order's value lies in its unparalleled network. A gathering of the Austrian or Spanish fleece today represents a convergence of immense, quiet influence families with centuries of accumulated wealth and connections, former heads of state and leaders of industry. The secret they guard could be the tradition of confidential dialogue itself. The closed-door sessions, still a hallmark of both branches, provide a rare space for off-the-record, high-level discussion free from political posturing and media leaks. This is not a shadow world government, but a unique forum where influence is cultivated and relationships are forged in a way that is simply impossible in the public sphere. The treasure is not gold, but trust. The transmutation is not of lead, but of information and access within a trusted circle. Furthermore, the possibility remains that the physical artifacts of the Order's secret history still exist, silently guarded by its modern heirs. The legendary archive, if it ever existed, would be one of the most priceless historical collections in the world. Its contents would not just be of academic interest, they could rewrite our understanding of European history, revealing the true backroom dealings behind wars, treaties, and revolutions. The decision to keep such documents private, even today, would be a final, powerful act of loyalty to the Order's ancient vows of secrecy. It would be a declaration that some histories are not for public consumption, that the mysteries of the fleece are meant to be preserved, not solved. So, as we watch the dignified processions in Madrid or read about the private mass in Vienna, we are left with a tantalizing ambiguity. The Knights of the Golden Fleece today are undoubtedly custodians of a magnificent tradition. But whether they are also the last sentinels of a deeper, hidden truth is a question that their very existence continues to pose. The golden collar still hangs, a silent question mark suspended between a glorious past and an inscrutable present. This new layer of the mystery brings us to the 20th century's darkest hour, a period that casts a long and troubling shadow over the gilded history of the Golden Fleece. As the Nazi Party rose to power in Germany, its ideology of racial purity and totalitarian control stood in stark, violent opposition to the Order's ancient ideals of Christian chivalry and aristocratic honor. Yet, the reality of this era is fraught with uncomfortable complexity. While the Order as an institution never endorsed the Third Reich, the actions and associations of some of its most prominent members during the 1930s and 40s reveal a chapter of moral compromise, difficult choices, and a silence that has been heavily scrutinized. To understand this, we must look at the fractured political landscape of the interwar years, particularly in Austria. Many within the Austrian aristocracy and the Catholic Church, viewing themselves as bulwarks against the twin threats of communism and what they saw as the chaos of democracy, initially saw Hitler's regime as a necessary, if distasteful, force for order and national revival. This perspective, a fatal miscalculation, created an environment where collaboration, or at least acquiescence, could take root. The most direct and controversial connection involves individuals who held dual allegiances. Several high-ranking members of the Nazi Party, including prominent figures in the SS, were also enrolled in the Austrian Order of the Golden Fleece. This was not a formal alliance between the institutions, but a profound infiltration. For the Nazis, membership in such a prestigious ancient order offered a veneer of legitimacy and a connection to a romanticized Germanic past. For those within the Fleece who sympathized with the Nazi cause, it represented a misguided belief that they could influence the new regime from within, or that national duty superseded their chivalric oaths. The presence of men wearing both the golden collar and the swastika armband created an impossible contradiction. The order's statutes demanded fealty to the Catholic faith and moral righteousness, principles fundamentally violated by the Nazi regime's policies of persecution and genocide. This internal conflict forced a crisis of conscience that the order, as a body, struggled to publicly resolve. The situation came to a head with the Anschluss in 1938, the forced annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany. This event placed the Austrian Knights in an acutely dangerous position. The head of their order was the exiled emperor blessed Karl I's son, Otto von Habsburg, a vocal and passionate opponent of Nazism who was actively working from abroad to restore Austrian independence. The Nazis, in turn, viewed the Habsburgs as enemies of the state. Otto was sentenced to death in absentia, and any overt loyalty to the dynasty became an act of treason. In the face of this terror, the order's public voice fell silent. There was no grand, unified declaration against the annexation or the ensuing persecution. This silence can be interpreted in different ways. From one perspective, it was a necessary act of survival. A public denunciation would have led to the immediate dissolution of the order, the seizure of its treasures, and likely the arrest and execution of its members. The choice may have been to preserve the institution itself, retreating into a defensive hibernation much as it had during the Napoleonic Wars, hoping to outlast the tyranny. However, this silence also carries a heavy moral weight. For an institution that presented itself as a guardian of Christian virtue, its failure to issue a collective, unequivocal condemnation of the regime's atrocities remains a stain on its modern legacy. Individual knights demonstrated immense courage. Some used their positions and resources to help persecuted individuals escape or went into exile themselves. But the order as a collective entity did not take a stand. This inaction reflects the broader dilemma faced by many traditional institutions across Europe at the time, trapped between the brutality of a new ideology and their own instinct for self-preservation. The controversy is amplified when we consider the order's extensive network across Europe. Its knights included diplomats, industrialists, and men with significant influence. The potential for organized resistance, or at least for coordinated humanitarian efforts, was theoretically immense, yet it was largely left to individual conscience rather than institutional directive. This period forces us to confront the limits of the order's power when faced with a modern totalitarian state, and it adds a deeply human and deeply flawed layer to its ancient mystique, reminding us that even the most legendary brotherhoods are ultimately composed of fallible men navigating an impossible world. The candlelight of a Renaissance palazzo flickers across a table laden with maps of European battlefields and coded letters from foreign courts. Here, in the heart of 16th century intrigue, we find the body of a man who should have been untouchable. His name was Louis de Luxembourg, Count of St. Paul, and he was not just any nobleman. He was a knight of the Golden Fleece, a constable of France, and a man whose web of double dealing had finally ensnared him. His story is a perfect case study in how the Order's secretive world could conceal not just power, but also a perfect crime. In the bitter winter of 1475, this master of political duplicity was led to the scaffold in Paris, beheaded on the orders of his own king, Louis XI. But the official story of his treason barely scratches the surface. The true mystery is not who ordered his death, that is a matter of public record, but why the immense protective power of the Golden Fleece, an order sworn to defend its brothers, failed to save him. Was his execution a simple act of royal justice, or was it the final, violent move in a hidden game played within the Order's own secret chapters? To understand the peril Louis de Luxembourg created for himself, you have to appreciate the knife edge he walked between two mortal enemies. As the Constable of France, he was the supreme military commander of the French army, sworn to serve King Louis XI. Simultaneously, as a knight of the Golden Fleece, he had sworn sacred oaths of loyalty to Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, who was at that very moment engaged in a desperate war against the French king. Louis attempted to serve both masters, and in doing so, he betrayed them both. For years, he acted as a double agent, taking French gold while secretly promising military support to Charles. He negotiated a secret treaty with the English, inviting them to invade France, all while assuring King Louis of his unwavering loyalty. He was a master of the clandestine promise, the coded letter, and the whispered assurance, playing the great powers of Europe against each other to increase his own personal domain. His entire strategy relied on the absolute secrecy of his communications and the assumption that his exalted status would shield him from the consequences. He was, in essence, testing the limits of the Order's protective veil, believing its golden collar was a suit of armor no king would dare pierce. The facts of his downfall are as dramatic as any thriller. King Louis XI, a ruler so notoriously paranoid and cunning he was called the Universal Spider, had grown deeply suspicious of his constable. Through a network of spies and intercepted letters, the king pieced together the outline of Louis de Luxembourg's treachery. The damning evidence was a trail of secret correspondence with the Duke of Burgundy and the English court. In late 1474, the Spider King decided the game was over. Louis de Luxembourg was arrested and imprisoned in the Bastille. His trial was a spectacle, with the king himself presenting the evidence of the constable's double dealing. The knight was found guilty of treason against the crown of France, but this is where the official history ends and the deeper mystery begins. Why, in his moment of greatest need, did his brothers in the Golden Fleece not intervene? The Order's statutes contained powerful mechanisms to defend its members, even from sovereigns. They could have convened an emergency chapter, lodged formal protests, or exerted immense diplomatic pressure. Yet, the historical record shows only a deafening silence from the Burgundian court. This void of support points to a far more compelling and sinister possibility, that Louis de Luxembourg's death was not just a royal execution, but an assassination sanctioned, or at least tacitly accepted, by powerful forces within the Order of the Golden Fleece itself. Consider the primary suspects from within the Order's own ranks. The most obvious is his nominal brother knight, Duke Charles the Bold of Burgundy. Louis had repeatedly promised Charles military aid and then failed to deliver, leaving the Burgundian army in precarious positions. Charles, a man of volcanic temper and zero tolerance for disloyalty, may have finally concluded that the treacherous constable was more of a liability than an asset. By allowing the French king to remove him, Charles could rid himself of a problematic ally without dirtying his own hands. he could claim plausible deniability while achieving a vital strategic goal. The Order's secrecy would have provided the perfect cover for this unspoken understanding. A quiet message passed through a trusted intermediary during a closed chapter meeting could have been enough to ensure that no knight would lift a finger to save the condemned man. Another compelling suspect is the network of rival French nobles who also wore the fleece. Louis de Luxembourg's vast landholdings and immense power made him many enemies at the French court. These rival knights would have seen his downfall as a golden opportunity to seize his titles and influence for themselves. Within the Order's secretive chambers, where personal ambition and state policy were inextricably linked, these men could have easily argued that Louis's reckless duplicity was a threat to the stability of the entire French realm, and by extension to the Order's interests there. By quietly agreeing not to intervene, they could appease their king and reap the rewards of their rival's destruction, all under the guise of respecting the legal process of a sovereign state. This theory paints the Order not as a unified brotherhood, but as a snake pit of competing ambitions where the sacred oath was secondary to political expediency. The most tantalizing theory, however, connects his death directly to the Order's most clandestine activities. What if Louis de Luxembourg wasn't just playing a political game, but was on the verge of revealing something the Order was desperate to keep hidden? Perhaps his constant shifting between courts had given him access to a devastating secret, the location of a hidden Templar treasure the Order was guarding, the details of a secret treaty that would shatter European alliances, or the identity of a mole within the French government. If he threatened to expose this information to save his own skin, his assassination would have become a matter of existential necessity for the inner circle of the Fleece. His very public trial and execution in this light would be a masterstroke of misdirection. It provided a perfectly logical, state-sanctioned reason for his death, neatly eliminating a security risk while ensuring no one would look for a more shadowy perpetrator. The Order's legendary secrecy, the very thing that had empowered Louis, became the weapon that silently eliminated him, a stark warning to any other knight who might consider betraying the fraternity's innermost trust. The chilling legacy of the Count of St. Paul's death is that it remains an open wound in the Order's history, a stark demonstration that the golden collar was not an invincible shield. It revealed a brutal hierarchy of secrets where some knowledge was so dangerous it mandated death, and some loyalties were so conditional they could be severed with an axe. His story forces us to see the Knights of the Golden Fleece not as a monolithic block of chivalric heroes, but as a complex and often ruthless organization where the lines between brotherhood and betrayal, and between justice and assassination, were often blurred beyond recognition. In the end, the greatest mystery of his unsolved death is not about the man who died, but about the brothers who let it happen, leaving us to wonder how many other secrets from that turbulent era were buried with him on that cold winter's day in Paris. But the shadowy power of the Fleece was not confined to political assassination. It could also be mobilized for a desperate, daring rescue. Picture the scene in the spring of 1917. The cataclysm of the First World War rages on, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that ancient, creaking edifice, is beginning to fracture under the strain. At its head sits the young Emperor Karl I, a man thrust onto the throne 2 years prior, now watching his world disintegrate. He is a sovereign of the Golden Fleece, but his crown is a heavy burden, and his empire is starving, mutinying, and collapsing around him. As the war effort crumbles, a new and more immediate threat emerges from his most powerful ally. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, seeing Austria-Hungary's weakness, begins to exert immense pressure, pushing for a de facto military annexation that would reduce Karl's empire to a mere vassal state. The situation is so dire that there are genuine fears the young emperor and his family could be seized by the German High Command, held as puppets to ensure total compliance. It is in this atmosphere of suffocating peril that the ancient network of the Golden Fleece is activated, not for conquest but for the most personal of missions, to spirit their sovereign to safety. The operation was a masterpiece of clandestine planning, leveraging the Order's unparalleled assets of loyalty, discretion, and geographic reach. The plan, codenamed Operation Capuchin, was hatched by a small, trusted circle that almost certainly included knights bound by their sacred oaths. The objective was audacious: to covertly transport the Emperor, his wife Empress Zita, and their young son, Crown Prince Otto, from their primary residence at Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna to the relative safety of a secret headquarters in the Hungarian town of Bad Tatzmannsdorf. The journey, though not long in distance, was a gauntlet of potential discovery. German spies and military officials were everywhere in Vienna, watching the imperial family's every move. A conventional departure with a full motorcade would have been an invitation for interception. The Knight's solution was a feat of misdirection worthy of any intelligence service. On the chosen day, the imperial family carried out their normal public schedule, maintaining a facade of calm routine to avoid raising any alarms. Then, under the cover of darkness, they slipped away not in a grand state vehicle, but in a series of unmarked, ordinary-looking cars, the kind that would not attract a second glance on the road. The execution of the escape relied entirely on the Order's hidden network. The drivers were not random chauffeurs. They were almost certainly trusted agents of the Crown, possibly even lower-ranking members of the Fleece or men whose families had served the Habsburgs for generations. The route was carefully scouted and secured in advance, avoiding major checkpoints and utilizing back roads where the German presence was thin. Safe houses along the way, likely the estates of loyal Hungarian nobles who were also knights of the Order, stood ready to provide refuge if the convoy was compromised. This was the Fleece in its purest, most functional form, a web of sworn allegiance that transcended bureaucracy and national borders within the empire. It was a system built on personal trust and sacred vows, a human infrastructure that could be activated in a crisis when the official organs of the state were either too slow, too infiltrated, or too paralyzed to act. The Knights provided the invisible threads that guided their sovereign through the labyrinth of threat. Upon their arrival in Bad Tatzmannsdorf, the Emperor and his family were housed in the Villa Welserheim, a secluded property that now became the clandestine nerve center of a crumbling empire. For several critical weeks, this was the true seat of Habsburg power. From here, Emperor Karl could communicate with his remaining loyal commanders and attempt to salvage his authority away from the prying eyes and overwhelming pressure of the German High Command in Vienna. The success of this operation, however fleeting its strategic impact, demonstrates the enduring potency of the Fleece's secret structures. When empires fall, armies dissolve, and governments betray their leaders, the oldest bonds of personal fealty can sometimes be the only things that remain. The Knights did not save the Austro-Hungarian Empire that was a force of history too powerful for any secret order to stop. But in those desperate weeks, they succeeded in their most fundamental, ancient duty. They protected the physical person of their sovereign, using their network as a shield when all other shields had failed. This real-life cloak and dagger mission stands as a powerful testament to the fact that even in the modern age of total war and mechanized conflict, the human network of the Golden Fleece remained a tool of last resort, capable of pulling off a rescue that would have been impossible through any official channel. Now it's your turn to become a cryptographer of history. We've spent our journey delving into theories and tracing shadows, but the deepest truths of the Golden Fleece were never written out in plain text. They were encoded in the very objects the Knights held most sacred. Let's gather the pieces of their visual puzzle. Start with the central icon, the Golden Fleece itself. We know the surface-level myth of Jason's quest, but look closer. In the world of alchemy, the fleece was a powerful symbol for the philosopher's stone in its final, completed state. Alchemical texts sometimes describe the stone as having a fibrous, almost wool-like crystalline structure, a tangible prize achieved only after the long and arduous great work. So, was the knight's quest truly about capturing a mythical ram's pelt, or was it an internal journey to achieve a state of spiritual perfection, with the pendant representing the ultimate transformation of the soul from base lead into spiritual gold? Next, examine the other elements of the magnificent collar. Look at the fire steels shaped like the letter B for Burgundy and the striking flints that appear to shower sparks. The standard interpretation tells us this represents the knight's fiery faith, ready to spark at a moment's notice, but through an alchemical lens, fire is the essential transformative element. It is the constant, controlled heat of the furnace that purifies the materials within. The flint and steel, two opposing elements striking together to create a new, third element, fire, could symbolize the crucial alchemical marriage of sulfur and mercury, the fixed and the volatile, whose union ignites the entire process of transmutation. The golden collar, then, is not merely jewelry. It is a wearable diagram of a spiritual experiment, a constant physical reminder that the knight's duty was to be the vessel and the fuel for his own purification. Now step back from the regalia and consider the power of color in their world. The knights were famously depicted in robes of deep, vibrant scarlet and rich, dark velvet. To the medieval mind, the color red was not merely a sign of wealth or status. It was the color of blood, of life, of sacrifice, and of divine love. In the Catholic liturgy, red is worn on feasts of martyrs who shed their blood for their faith. For a knight sworn to defend the church, this connection is direct. Yet, in the secret language of alchemy, red holds another parallel meaning. It is the final color in the sequence of the great work, following the initial black stage of putrefaction and the white stage of purification. The achievement of the color rubedo, or reddening, signaled the successful creation of the philosopher's stone. So when a knight donned his scarlet robes for a chapter meeting, was he simply wearing his official uniform, or was he silently proclaiming his participation in a continuous, collective ritual of spiritual achievement, a living embodiment of the final, perfected state? Let's also decipher their heraldry. The fire steel distinctive B shape is itself a subject for decoding. While it obviously stands for Burgundy, some researchers have proposed it could represent a double axe, a labris, an ancient symbol of power and sovereignty found in Minoan and Greek cultures, connecting the order to a lineage of authority far older than the 15th century. Furthermore, the arrangement of these fire steels and flints on the collar creates a repeating, linked pattern. This could be seen as a chain of office, but it could also be interpreted as a symbolic representation of a linked, interdependent brotherhood, each knight a single, vital link, and each spark a testament to their collective power. Even the number of links or the specific arrangement of the components could have held meaning, a numeric code known only to the initiated, perhaps relating to sacred geometry or the steps of their private rituals. Now, I want you to take these pieces, the fleece, the fire steel, the flint, the colors, and assemble your own interpretation. Look at a painting of a knight like the one by Rogier van der Weyden and try to read it not as a portrait but as a coded document. Why is the background so stark, forcing your eye to the symbols on his chest? Why is the light falling precisely on the golden links? Could the artist be guiding your gaze toward a hidden message? Consider the political code as well. When a duke bestowed the fleece upon a foreign prince, was it purely an honor, or was the very act a complex signal? The gift of this specific collar, with its alchemical and mythic undertones, could have been a way of saying, "You are now part of a transformative project," or "We are linked in a quest that transcends our kingdoms." The symbol was a language, and every bestowal was a sentence spoken in a diplomatic dialect that everyone could hear, but only a few could truly understand. So, what do you see in these symbols? Do they point to a hidden spiritual tradition, a sophisticated political cipher, or a breathtaking fusion of both? The evidence is right there, glittering in the art, waiting for you to crack the code. This idea pushes us into one of the most shadowy and compelling realms of speculation surrounding the Golden Fleece. the possibility that Duke Philip the Good was not just building a state but sheltering a spiritual revolution. To grasp the sheer audacity of this theory, we must first feel the intense religious pressure of the 15th century. This was an era where the authority of the Catholic Church was absolute and often brutally enforced. Heresy was not a philosophical disagreement. It was a crime against God and a direct threat to the social order, punishable by imprisonment, torture, and death at the stake. The memory of the crusade against the Cathars, which had wiped an entire Christian sect from the south of France just 2 centuries earlier, was still a potent warning. This was the world into which Philip introduced his order, an institution that, from its very inception, displayed a fascinating independence from papal control. The Duke of Burgundy, not the Pope, was the sovereign of the Golden Fleece. He appointed its members and presided over its chapters. This structural autonomy is the first crucial clue for the heresy hypothesis. Why would a supposedly devout Christian duke create a chivalric order that deliberately bypassed the ultimate spiritual authority on earth, unless he intended to foster beliefs or practices that Rome would not and could not ever approve? The nature of the potential heresy the order might have protected is where the mystery truly deepens, and several compelling candidates emerge from the historical shadows. One of the most prominent is a revival of Gnostic or Cathar-like beliefs. These dualist heresies taught that the physical, material world was not created by a benevolent God, but by a flawed or even evil demiurge. The true, hidden God was pure spirit, entirely separate from the corrupt realm of matter. Salvation, therefore, came not through church sacraments or pious works, but through a secret knowledge gnosis revealed only to a select few initiates. If the Knights of the Golden Fleece were guardians of such a tradition, it would radically reframe their entire purpose. The quest for the fleece would transform from a metaphor for chivalric virtue into a literal search for this liberating gnosis. The order's famous secrecy would then become a matter of life and death, a necessary veil to protect a spirituality that the Church viewed as diabolical. Their lavish ceremonies, so focused on material splendor, could even be seen as a brilliant act of misdirection, flaunting worldly wealth to conceal a doctrine that utterly rejected the world's intrinsic value. Another possibility links the order to the complex and often persecuted world of Christian mysticism, particularly the teachings of Meister Eckhart or the Brethren of the Free Spirit. These movements emphasized a direct, unmediated experience of the divine, one that could potentially render the institutional church and its priesthood unnecessary. They spoke of achieving a state of perfection on earth where the soul was so united with God that it was beyond sin and no longer bound by conventional moral law. To the medieval church, this was a terrifyingly anarchic idea. If a powerful duke and his inner circle of knights were secretly adhering to such beliefs, it would mean they were operating under a spiritual authority that superseded that of the Pope himself. The order's closed-door chapters could have been the perfect environment for fostering this direct, mystical connection, creating a spiritual elite that saw itself as answerable only to God, not to Rome. This would explain why Philip so carefully insulated his brotherhood from papal oversight. He wasn't just making a political statement. He was creating a protected space for a form of worship that the Church had explicitly condemned. Perhaps the most evocative connection is to the phantom of the Knights Templar. As we explored earlier, the Templars were destroyed in the early 14th century amid shocking accusations of heresy, including the denial of Christ, spitting on the cross, and worshipping a mysterious head or idol known as the Baphomet. While these charges were almost certainly fabricated by a cash-strapped French king, the stigma never fully faded. The theory suggests that the Golden Fleece was founded to be a new vessel for whatever esoteric core the Templars truly possessed. This wasn't necessarily the satanic worship of the Confessions, but perhaps a more complex, heterodox theology the Templars had encountered during their long stay in the Holy Land, a blending of Christian, Islamic, and Jewish mystical thought that was too unorthodox for its time. By adopting a symbol as ambiguous as the Golden Fleece, Philip could have been subtly honoring this suppressed lineage, offering a haven for a banned spiritual tradition under the impeccable disguise of Burgundian chivalry. The fleece itself, in this context, might symbolize the lost, true doctrine of the Templars, a precious spiritual truth that had to be guarded at all costs. But why would Philip the Good, a ruler who needed the church's political support, take such an immense risk? The answer may lie in a sophisticated form of spiritual realpolitik. The 15th century was also a time of profound crisis for the papacy, with the Western Schism having recently split Christendom between 2 and then 3 rival popes. This scandal had severely damaged the moral authority of the Church, leading many powerful lay rulers to question its ultimate power. For a Duke of Philip's ambition, protecting a hidden stream of spiritual knowledge could have been the ultimate insurance policy and a source of immense unseen power. It would position him and his order not merely as loyal sons of the Church, but as independent arbiters of a deeper, more ancient truth. He could publicly conform to Catholic orthodoxy, receiving all the political benefits while privately cultivating a Gnostic elite that answered only to him. This would make the Golden Fleece far more than a chivalric order. It would be a covert church within the Church, a guardian of a forbidden spiritual lineage with the potential to challenge the very foundations of medieval Christianity, all while hiding in the most brilliant place imaginable, the dazzling, very public and seemingly orthodox heart of Burgundian courtly power. Charting a course through 500 years of history, we begin to see a pattern emerge, not of random events, but of a recurring signature. It's a trail of influence and intrigue that suggests the Order of the Golden Fleece was not merely a participant in history, but often a hidden architect. Our timeline begins in the 15th century with the Order's very foundation. Why would Duke Philip the Good choose a symbol as ambiguous as the Golden Fleece, one so open to alchemical, mercantile, and heretical interpretations? This was not an accident. From its inception, the Order was designed as a vessel for layered meanings, a perfect container for secrets. The first dot on our map is this founding act itself, a masterstroke of political and spiritual ambiguity that set the stage for everything to come. Fast forward just a few decades to the year 1475, and we encounter our second major data point, the shocking execution of Louis de Luxembourg, the Constable of France and a fellow knight. Here, the established narrative of royal justice feels incomplete. Why did his brothers in the Fleece, sworn to defend him, remain conspicuously silent? The pattern suggests something darker than mere political failure. This looks like a sanctioned silencing. Louis was a master of double dealing, playing the courts of France and Burgundy against each other. In doing so, he likely gained access to secrets too dangerous for him to hold. His very public beheading, authorized by the French king, serves as a perfect smoke screen for what may have been the Order's first recorded assassination. A brutal message that betrayal of the inner circle would be met with ultimate finality, even if the sword was wielded by another's hand. The plot thickens dramatically as we move into the early 17th century, landing on the 23rd of May, 1618, in the city of Prague. The infamous defenestration of Prague, where 3 Catholic governors were thrown from a castle window, was the spark that ignited the 30 Years' War. But the true fuse was lit days before in a clandestine meeting. Evidence strongly suggests that Protestant members of the Golden Fleece convened a secret chapter without their sovereign's knowledge to plan this act of rebellion. This is not an isolated incident of dissent. It is the Order's secretive structure being weaponized against its own emperor. The knights used their private network and sworn vows of secrecy not to uphold imperial authority, but to orchestrate a revolution. This event connects directly back to the founding principle of autonomy from higher powers, revealing an organization capable of turning its own tools against the very throne it was created to serve. As the centuries turn, the timeline takes a more esoteric turn. In the 17th century, the court of Emperor Rudolf II, a sovereign of the order, transforms Prague into the undisputed capital of European alchemy. Rudolf's deep personal immersion in the great work was no eccentric hobby. He surrounded himself with the greatest alchemical minds of the age, from John Dee to Edward Kelly, and his patronage was protected by the authority of the Fleece. This is not a disconnected historical curiosity. It is a clear continuation of the hidden tradition embedded in the order's symbol from day one. The golden collar, with its flints and steels sparking the fire of transformation, becomes a physical manifesto. The pursuit of the philosopher's stone, the spiritual transmutation of the self, appears to have been a continuous, protected strand of the order's activities, nurtured in the shadows of its more public political maneuverings. The next critical point arrives in the 18th century, not with a bang but with a schism. The War of the Spanish Succession culminates in the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which legally splits the Golden Fleece into separate Austrian and Spanish branches. On the surface, this is a political solution to a dynastic dispute, but viewed through the lens of a continuous conspiracy, it takes on a more profound significance. What happened to the order's secret knowledge when it was divided? Was the legendary archive, if it existed, split in two? Did the Austrian branch retain the deeper alchemical and mystical traditions of Rudolf's court, while the Spanish branch focused on the pragmatic machinery of state power? This schism represents a pivotal moment of fragmentation, an event that likely scattered the order's most guarded secrets, ensuring that no single person or faction would ever hold all the pieces of the puzzle again. Our timeline then plunges into the terror of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon. Here, the order's pattern is one of survival and retreat. As revolutionary armies swept away the old world, the knights did not stand and fight. They vanished into the shadows. Their magnificent regalia was hidden, their chapter meetings went deeply underground, and their communication became a web of coded messages. This is not the behavior of a defeated institution, but of a resilient organism preserving its core DNA. When Napoleon sought to co-opt the Fleece's prestige for his own new empire, he found an organization that had perfected the art of existing just beyond his grasp. This era demonstrates the order's most crucial survival skill, the ability to become invisible when the light of scrutiny becomes too bright, only to re-emerge when the political climate shifts. The final dots on our timeline bring us into the heart of the 20th century, a period that tests the order's moral compass. During the rise of the Nazi regime, the Austrian Fleece fell into a profound and controversial silence. While individual knights demonstrated bravery, the order as a body issued no collective condemnation. This silence is haunting, but it fits a centuries-old pattern of prioritizing institutional survival above all else. Yet, from within this same era comes a counterpoint, the daring escape of Emperor Karl I in 1917. As his empire crumbled around him, the ancient network of the Fleece activated, using its clandestine routes and loyal agents to spirit the sovereign to safety. This operation, a masterpiece of quiet planning, proves that the old networks of personal fealty, forged over 500 years, still functioned with precision even in the age of total war. Connecting these dots across half a millennium reveals a startling possibility. The political assassination of Louis de Luxembourg, the revolutionary plot in Prague, the patronage of forbidden alchemical knowledge, the strategic schism, the survival through obscurity, and the modern-day dilemmas of power and silence, these are not disconnected episodes. They are the visible tremors of a single, continuous entity adapting to the tides of history. The thread connecting them is a relentless commitment to a dual existence, a public face of chivalric honor and a hidden world of political manipulation and spiritual secrecy. This timeline suggests that the true quest of the Golden Fleece was never for a mythical fleece, but for the preservation of its own influence and the guarded knowledge it held. a mission that required it to shape events from the shadows, surviving dynasties, empires, and entire world orders to maintain its enigmatic purpose into the modern day. But perhaps the most telling sign of the Order's enduring grip on our imagination is its migration into the interactive world of video games, where players don't just observe the mystery, they become active participants within it. Titles like the Assassin's Creed series, which is built upon a millennia-old secret war between hidden factions, frequently feature chivalric orders that are clear stand-ins for the Golden Fleece, portrayed as powerful, shadowy cabals manipulating historical events from behind the throne. In these digital worlds, the knights are not just historical figures. They are high-level targets, the guardians of forbidden knowledge or powerful artifacts that the player must uncover. This interactive framing taps directly into the core of the Fleece's modern appeal, the thrill of the conspiracy theory. In an age of information overload and often impenetrable power structures, the idea that history was shaped by a single, knowable secret society is a comforting narrative. It simplifies the chaotic complexity of the past into a solvable puzzle, and the Golden Fleece, with its verifiable historical existence and its aura of genuine secrecy, provides the perfect, credible foundation upon which these elaborate fictional labyrinths can be built. The game controller becomes a tool for peeling back the layers of history, fulfilling a deep-seated human desire to find patterns, uncover truths, and believe that the levers of power, though hidden, can ultimately be found and manipulated. This persistent fascination across so many forms of media begs the question, why this order? Why does the Golden Fleece, among all the knightly brotherhoods of history, hold such a unique and powerful place in our collective psyche? The answer lies in a powerful confluence of factors that make it the ideal vessel for our modern myths. Firstly, its symbolism is uniquely flexible and rich. Unlike a simple cross or a heraldic beast, the Golden Fleece is an object of myth. It is not an answer, but a question. It invites interpretation. Is it a spiritual goal, a physical treasure, a symbol of economic power, or a fragment of lost knowledge? This inherent ambiguity allows each new generation and each new storyteller to project their own anxieties and desires onto it. In the 19th century, it might have symbolized a lost aristocratic world. In our current era of distrust in institutions, it perfectly represents the hidden networks of elite power we suspect are pulling the strings just outside of public view. The Fleece is a blank canvas onto which we paint our contemporary fears about who really controls the world. Furthermore, the Order's history provides just enough documented fact to make the wildest fiction feel tantalizingly plausible. We have the real, breathtaking art, the detailed statutes, the lists of emperors and kings who were members. This solid bedrock of historical reality makes the leap into conspiracy and fantasy feel like a shorter, more credible one. It's the difference between a story about a completely fictional secret society and one about the Freemasons or the Golden Fleece. The latter carries the weight of truth, making the fictional extensions feel more like uncovered revelations. The Order's genuine secrecy, the closed-door chapters, the severe penalties for betrayal isn't something novelists and filmmakers had to invent. They merely had to amplify what was already there. The real mystery of the Fleece is a door left slightly ajar by history, and we are irresistibly drawn to push it open and imagine what lies in the darkness beyond. Ultimately, the Knights of the Golden Fleece endure in popular culture because they represent the ultimate secret history, a narrative that suggests the world we know is merely a facade. In a time when official accounts are often met with skepticism, the idea that a brotherhood founded in the 15th century could have steered the course of empires, guarded ancient secrets, and continues to operate in some form today is a profoundly compelling alternative. They fulfill our need for romance, for a time when world affairs were dictated by oaths and symbols rather than by spreadsheets and press releases. The golden collar is more than a piece of jewelry. It has become a universal symbol for the allure of the unknown, a gleaming reminder that the most thrilling stories are not those that have been told, but those that remain hidden, waiting just beneath the surface of the history books, challenging us to look closer and question everything we think we know. And so we arrive at the heart of the labyrinth, having traced the intricate corridors of power, secrecy, and symbolism that define the Knights of the Golden Fleece. We have seen an institution that is far more than a relic of chivalry. It is a living palimpsest of European history. On its surface, we can read the official story, the glorious foundation by Philip the Good, the magnificent chapters, the unwavering Catholic piety. But scratch that surface and other, older writings show through. The political blueprint of a state built on loyalty oaths gives way to whispers of Templar resurrection and the guardianship of a lost treasury. A Christian knight striving for virtue is superimposed with the image of the alchemical adept seeking spiritual gold through the great work. The public defender of the faith stands alongside the shadowy conspirator in the windows of Prague. Each of these layers, the political, the financial, the heretical, the esoteric, does not cancel the others out. Instead, they coexist, intertwined and mutually reinforcing, creating a historical entity of breathtaking complexity. The true genius of the Golden Fleece lies in this very multiplicity. It was designed to be all things to all people, a symbol so rich in ambiguity that it could conceal its true purpose in a blaze of glorious publicity. This legacy of layered meaning did not end with the fall of the Burgundian dukes or the schism of the Habsburg Empire. It simply evolved, finding new ways to endure. In the hushed, religious ceremonies of the modern Austrian order, we see the preservation of tradition as a sacred act in a secular world. In the state-sponsored investitures of the Spanish branch, we witness the ancient symbol being repurposed as a tool of modern diplomacy and soft power. And in its vibrant afterlife in films, novels, and video games, the Order has achieved a new kind of immortality, becoming a universal shorthand for the elite, hidden cabal that pulls the strings of history from behind a velvet curtain. The golden collar is no longer just a chivalric badge. It has become a powerful meme in our collective consciousness, representing our enduring fascination with the idea that the world we see is merely a stage, and that the real story is always happening just out of sight in the secret chapters and closed-door meetings of the powerful. Which brings us to our final and perhaps most provocative question. After centuries of speculation, after countless theories about treasure, heresy, and alchemy, we must ask, what is the ultimate mystery of the Golden Fleece? Is it the specific secrets it may have guarded, the location of the Burgundian treasury, the formulas of the philosopher's stone, the rituals of a forbidden faith? Or is the true, enduring power of the fleece found not in the answers it holds, but in the potent, intoxicating idea of the secret itself? Humanity is at its core a species of storytellers and puzzle solvers. We are driven by an innate curiosity, a need to believe that there is always more to discover, that the map of history has uncharted territories and hidden compartments. The Knights of the Golden Fleece, through their magnificent art, their severe statutes, and their legendary silence, perfected the art of nurturing this curiosity. They built an institution that was a perpetual question mark, an everlasting invitation to look deeper, to decode, to imagine. The treasure, in the end, may not be a chest of gold or a scroll of ancient wisdom, but the timeless human desire to believe in a hidden world, a quest that gives our own reality a deeper, more mysterious, and infinitely more fascinating dimension. The fleece was the prize for Jason, but the quest itself is the prize for us.